The story starts in a large, grand ballroom filled with well-dressed noble guests. Sudden tension ripples through the crowd as a voice cuts through the air, loudly calling out for Elizabeth. Crown Prince Fried of the Kingdom of Haldoria stands before the gathering, holding a young woman named Sylvie close to his side. Pointing an accusing finger, Fried aggressively demands to know if Elizabeth's jealousy knows no bounds and asks how she dared to push Sylvie down the stairs, declaring that all of her wicked deeds have now been fully exposed. He firmly states that he can no longer keep forgiving her just because she happens to be his fiancée. Fried delivers a final, crushing blow, shouting Elizabeth's full name and loudly declaring that he hereby severs their engagement. Looking toward the prince with a calm expression, she asks for his pardon and politely but firmly states that she has done no such thing. Looking out across the crowded ballroom, Elizabeth tries to de-escalate the situation by reminding everyone that this is a formal party to celebrate the founding of their kingdom, suggesting they should leave the jokes for another time. However, before she can even finish her sentence, someone suddenly reaches out and roughly grabs her, catching her completely by surprise. A man named Robert forcefully grabs Elizabeth by the arm. Elizabeth looks down in dismay, quietly uttering Robert's name as she is stopped. Fried angrily commands Elizabeth not to play dumb, claiming that Sylvie told him everything. Hearing the name of Lady Sylvia Lockett, Elizabeth quietly reflects on the situation as the pieces begin to fall into place. She reflects on the background of Lady Sylvia, noting that a baron recently took her in. She remembers how the gentlemen of high society have fallen for Sylvia's outspoken nature compared to the other noble ladies, finding her candid behavior to be a breath of fresh air within their strict social constraints, and that Prince Fried fell for her charm as well. Elizabeth recalls an old conversation in a stone hallway, remembering how she viewed the prince taking a second wife as none of her business. However, she had firmly advised Sylvia not to mingle with other men if she intended to maintain a relationship with His Highness. Back in the ballroom, Fried continues his public tirade, claiming that Sylvie is simply too nice and keeps covering for Elizabeth. He aggressively declares that he will not let Elizabeth bully her anymore, while Sylvia looks on from by his side. An escalating uproar echoes through the grand ballroom as the order is given to the guards to take this woman to jail. The commanding voice brands Elizabeth a criminal who tried to kill Sylvie. Forced onto the floor, Elizabeth looks up with shock and disbelief as a guard grips her arm. A guard hesitates, voicing his reluctance to carry out the order against a noblewoman. However, Elizabeth calmly responds that it is all right, recognizing that one cannot disobey a royal command. The guard, accompanied by Robert, looks on with a grim face while offering his sincere apologies to the lady. Meanwhile, back in the center of the room, Fried stands triumphantly with his arm outstretched to call for everyone's attention, keeping Sylvie closely by his side. Under the watchful eye of an armored guard, Elizabeth is escorted out of the grand venue and through a set of double doors. As she is led away into exile, Fried's voice rings out across the ballroom one final time, loudly announcing that his engagement with Elizabeth Leiston is officially void. She looks on with a quiet, solemn expression as she reflects on how the prince used His Majesty's absence to act completely as he pleased, echoing his final declaration that Sylvia Lockett will become his new fiancée. A lingering thought remains about what the prince intends to do next. Outside her cell, a guard's voice speaks through the stone archway, offering his humble apologies to the lady. The guard expresses deep remorse from the other side, lamenting that he has brought her to such a miserable place. Inside the stone walls, Elizabeth remains remarkably composed and reassures the guard that there is no need to fret. She calmly asks if the king and her father have been informed about the situation yet, expressing full confidence that they will fix everything upon returning from their diplomatic meeting. Sitting quietly on a wooden bench inside her dark cell, she convinces herself that they will surely rush back home the absolute moment they hear the news. A full month passes by in the dark cell, marked only by a single lit candle resting beside a thick stack of paperwork. Seated at a wooden desk piled high with heavy books and documents, Elizabeth reviews a sheet of paper with a quill in hand. She notes to herself that the documents contain highly classified information, deeply annoyed that even though the prince threw her in jail, it did not stop him from forcing her to do all of his work. Thoroughly fed up with his complete irresponsibility, she suddenly stops as a realization hits her, hearing an approach from outside and noting that someone has finally arrived. Our girl reaches her arm through the iron bars of the cell door, waving her hand to grab the attention of the armored guard standing down the hall. She politely asks the guard to excuse her and requests that he come closer. Walking over to the cell door, the guard looks toward her attentively, asking what he can do for her. Stepping up to the iron bars, Elizabeth fixes her gaze directly on the guard and uses the word hypnosis. Her voice carries a strange command, causing the guard's eyes to completely glaze over as a swirling pattern spins across his face, instantly placing him under her total control. With the guard completely entranced, Elizabeth commands him to sit over there and forget everything he is about to see. Walking away with a heavy, unstable wobble, the guard mindlessly complies as he voices his agreement. Once the coast is clear, Elizabeth looks toward the shadows of the stone corridor and calls for Mireille to finally come out. Suddenly, a pair of hidden feet appear from the edge of the hallway. Her waiting maid, Mireille, steps out from the darkness of the dungeon hallway, clasping her hands and offering a sincere apology to her lady for the long wait. Elizabeth emphasizes that they have very little time, immediately asking why absolutely no one has done anything to help her. She presses further, asking if her father and the king have at least heard about what happened. Mireille lowers her head with a deeply worried expression, letting out a hesitant sigh as she tries to find the right words. Looking entirely deflated, Mireille delivers the devastating truth, explaining that they only said Elizabeth will figure something out and clean up Fried's mess. She sadly adds that she is afraid they will not be returning anytime soon, leaving Elizabeth standing frozen in total disbelief. Frustration boils over inside the dark cell as Elizabeth grits her teeth. She realizes that her father and the king simply expect her to handle everything on her own yet again. The bad news only continues to pile up. Mireille stands downcast in the stone hallway, reluctantly informing her lady that malicious rumors are actively spreading outside, threatening to completely tarnish Elizabeth's honor. Hearing this, Elizabeth looks over in surprise, asking what rumors she could possibly be talking about. People throughout the kingdom are whispering that Elizabeth tried to murder Lady Sylvia out of pure jealousy, and that she is deliberately getting involved in politics just to seize the prince's power. Elizabeth directly asks Mireille if she managed to learn the true source behind these nasty rumors. Mireille confirms the dark truth, explaining that after investigating, she discovered His Highness used his own people to spread the lies, nearly calling the prince a waste of space before catching herself. A smirking image of Fried looms over the scene as Mireille firmly states that these are undoubtedly nothing but groundless accusations. The maid expresses deep concern, fearing that many people will ultimately believe these rumors to be true. Elizabeth bows her head slightly, closing her eyes as she absorbs the gravity of the situation. Mireille continues her report with a troubled expression, her voice full of hesitation as she turns her attention to Elizabeth's business. She cautiously moves to deliver the next piece of worrying news regarding the lady's firm. She reveals the full extent of the prince's actions. The maid explains that the prince ordered an investigation into the company after officially deeming Elizabeth a traitor to the nation. Furthermore, he is already placing merchants and nobles directly under his control into key positions at the firm, prompting a shocked reaction from Elizabeth. Elizabeth quietly reflects on this, stating that she originally set up the firm strictly for charity work and to provide aid to the poor, leaving her unable to see what His Highness could possibly hope to gain from taking it over. Looking down thoughtfully, Mireille points out that Elizabeth's firm is one of the most well-connected businesses in the entire kingdom, meaning the prince must have a deeper motive. Clenching her hands tightly against her apron out of frustration, Mireille acknowledges that it is not her place to ask, but she directly questions why her lady continues to devote herself so completely to this country. Elizabeth repeats the question back to herself because she is caught completely off guard by Mireille's sudden question. Elizabeth states calmly that she is a noble lady, and that protecting the nation and caring for its citizens are simply her duties. The words cause Mireille to look down with an emotional expression. She speaks softly, saying she respects her lady deeply and reminds her that Elizabeth saved her when her own house fell to ruin. Mireille reflects that without the lady's kindness, she would have ended up as a slave or a beggar, yet Elizabeth chose to make her a trusted confidant instead, prompting Elizabeth to look back at her attentively from inside the cell. The built-up emotion suddenly bursts forth as Mireille screams out that she despises this country. Elizabeth watches in utter shock as her maid passionately explains that the people of this nation treat the lady like a convenient tool they can simply discard whenever they want. Mireille's anger turns toward the rulers, her face contorted with frustration as she declares how much she hates that the masses believe the absolute worst about Elizabeth when all the lady does is help them. She fiercely adds that she deeply despises Duke Leyston and the king for completely ignoring Elizabeth in her most dire moment. Elizabeth stands completely stunned by the intense display of loyalty. Mireille delivers one final emotional statement, asserting that above all else, she loathes the prince for failing to see the lady's true worth. Staring directly into her maid's fiercely dedicated eyes, a profound realization washes over Elizabeth as she quietly observes how much Mireille truly cares. Our girl reflects on her past, remembering how she devoted her life to the nation and Prince Fried as his future wife ever since she came into this world. Standing amidst the silhouetted memories of noble crowds and the prince embracing another woman, she recalls how she tirelessly studied martial arts, magic, and etiquette, never allowing herself to make friends, only to be left questioning why she did it all. Deep in the darkness of her own thoughts, a sudden clarity washes over Elizabeth as she realizes the truth. She asks herself what the point of it all was, finally ready to let go of her past devotion. An explosive force shatters the silence of the dungeon as Elizabeth forcefully slams her fist directly into the solid stone wall of her cell. As dust settles and the thick stone wall begins to crumble away into a giant hole, Mireille watches in open-mouthed astonishment as her lady softly thanks her for her honesty. A confident smile spreads across Elizabeth's face as she looks directly at her maid, declaring that Mireille has finally opened her eyes. With absolute resolve in her gaze, she delivers a bold new plan, inviting her trusted confidant to escape this damned country together. Mireille clasps her hands together, a look of profound relief lighting up her face as she addresses her mistress. Elizabeth extends her hand, channeling her magical abilities as a bright energy glows from her palm. She sets a definitive timeline, stating that they will make their departure in 5 days. Our girl gestures toward a perfectly formed replica of herself appearing in the cell, explaining her plan to leave an ice doll in her stead to maintain the deception. Mireille nods in understanding, her expression turning confident as Elizabeth adds that they will use her own magic spell, illusion, to completely conceal them and ensure their escape. Our girl coordinates the final details through the iron bars, ordering Mireille to arrange a meeting with a specific person before the designated day arrives. Mireille bows her head politely, assuring her lady that she will fulfill the request immediately. The maid directly asks how the firm should be handled under these new circumstances. Elizabeth places a thoughtful hand to her chin, calmly deciding to let the prince go ahead and replace their people for now. Elizabeth outlines her strategy, instructing Mireille to tell their workers to leave the country entirely and wait for further instructions. She confidently adds that once she is firmly established abroad, she will contact them directly so they can all move forward together. She continues detailing her escape plan, requesting that a few of their people remain behind in the capital because they will need them to gather intelligence. She then asks Mireille if she has anything to add to the strategy. Mireille pauses, responding with all due respect before pointing out a glaring oversight. The maid explicitly suggests that her lady do something about the massive hole blown into the cell wall. Elizabeth slowly turns her head, looking back at the shattered masonry. Our girl quickly agrees, realizing she will be in deep trouble if anyone happens to see the broken wall. From the corridor, Mireille reassures her, noting that fixing it will be a complete breeze with the lady's divine artifact, while Elizabeth looks on with focus. Mireille smiles warmly from the hallway, offering a heartfelt blessing for her lady's upcoming journey. Elizabeth looks back at her trusted confidant, quietly offering her sincere thanks. The conversation draws to a close as Mireille prepares to depart, announcing that she will now return with her report. Elizabeth watches her leave from inside the iron cell bars, declaring that everything is absolutely perfect for their plan. Turning back toward the shattered masonry, Elizabeth prepares to act, raising her hand to invoke her powers. She reflects on the fundamental nature of the world, noting that all living beings possess internal mana. The ability to consciously control it using reason and theory is what everyone calls magic. Elizabeth's thoughts drift toward a vintage illustration of a magician's workshop filled with old books, an active cauldron, and alchemical tools. She recalls that a magician's intense training ultimately culminates in a grand achievement, which is the creation of a divine artifact. A divine artifact allows someone to materialize their inner mana into a physical tool. She notes that these creations differ greatly between people, with some taking the shape of swords or spears, as shown by the silhouetted forms of armored warriors. Channeling her own distinct energy, she calls upon her unique tool, ready to reveal what her divine artifact can do. Our girl manifests her unique abilities, which have taken the form of powerful books known as the Seven Grimoires. Holding one of the beautifully detailed covers in her hand, she calls upon the specific power of the grimoire of Beelzebub. Elizabeth reflects on the true nature of her book, noting that the grimoire of Beelzebub specifically lets her record magic spells. She considers the standard rules of magic, noting that theoretically, a person cannot use a spell unless they have a natural affinity for its specific attribute. However, she bypasses this rule completely by recording other people's spells directly into her own grimoire. She points her hand outward to channel her magical powers. She notes to herself that even though she naturally only has an affinity for water spells, using her divine artifact allows her to break standard limitations. Focusing her intent on the broken wall, Elizabeth calls out the word stone wall to trigger her magic. As a glowing magic circle rises from the pages of her open book, a sudden impact sounds through the cell, allowing her to easily cast earth spells and completely restore the broken masonry. She remarks that this recording trait also applies to hypnosis, the dark attribute spell she used to control the prison guard. Standing nearby, she snaps her fingers to break the enchantment. The armored guard suddenly lets out a gasp as the spell lifts, waking up to find himself sitting on the dungeon floor without any memory of what happened. The prison guard looks around in complete confusion, completely unaware that his mind was just under another person's command. He scratches his head and wonders out loud what he was doing just a moment ago. Elizabeth watches the guard's confusion through the bars of her cell. A clever, knowing smile spreads across her face as she quietly notes to herself that it looks like she is going to be very busy ahead. 5 days pass by in the capital, shifting the scene to a quiet room late at night. A young man rubs his tense neck after hours of writing, letting out a tired sigh of relief as he announces that he has finally finished writing his official report. Seated at a wooden desk covered in scattered paperwork, Viscount Lucas Lebrick, the ambassador of the Empire, relaxes back in his chair. He stretches his tired arms and sighs happily that he can finally go home. Reflecting on the chaos he witnessed, Lucas thinks back to how he originally came to celebrate the founding of the Kingdom of Haldoria, unable to believe the shocking events that took place. Lucas stares up at the ceiling with a grim expression. He speaks his thoughts aloud, declaring that the prince's public behavior was disgraceful, to say the absolute least. He continues his train of thought, while looking toward the memory of Prince Fried and Sylvie. He mutters quietly that the citizens of Haldoria will surely suffer under such a foolish future king. Lucas shifts his gaze as he contrasts the prince's foolishness with Elizabeth's remarkable reaction to the accusation. He reflects on how, unlike the hot-headed prince, Lady Elizabeth kept her composure perfectly, just as he had expected from her reputation. In his mind's eye, Lucas pictures the true scale of Elizabeth's hidden power, imagining her standing formidably with her magical book open in front of a battalion of heavily armored soldiers. He notes to himself that she has been the strategic mind behind most of the kingdom's recent advances, recalling that at the tender age of 10, she fiercely led troops into battle and inflicted considerable damage on the empire in the previous war. He remarks that as an imperial subject, he could not be more pleased that Haldoria willingly discarded their ultimate trump card. Suddenly, an anxious voice interrupts his scheming, loudly calling out his title. An attendant pushes open the door to the office, nervously delivering the message that Lucas has an unexpected visitor. Surprised by the timing, Lucas looks up from his desk and questions who could possibly be visiting this late at night. The hesitant attendant looks over toward the entranceway, struggling to explain as a mysterious armored figure stands waiting just outside the threshold. Shock takes hold of the office as the late-night visitor steps through the doorway. Lucas recoils in sheer disbelief, his voice shaking as he calls out the name of King Bullet of Haldoria. Lucas desperately tries to understand the situation, backing away from his desk while questioning how this is possible. He asks the king why he is there, pointing out that he was supposed to have left the country entirely to attend a crucial diplomatic meeting. Up close, a confident grin spreads across the king's bearded face as he prepares to explain. The king offers an apology for tricking the ambassador in this manner. Lucas can only stare forward in complete confusion. The king turns his gaze slightly to the side and calls out to Mire, who promptly voices her agreement. With a sharp clap of her hands, Mireille activates her magical abilities, causing a brilliant burst of white light to suddenly explode in the middle of the room. Lucas shields his eyes from the blinding flash, completely caught off guard as a soft, familiar voice speaks out through the glowing energy, stating that it is a pleasure to meet him. As the bright illusion completely shatters like shards of broken glass, Elizabeth stands revealed in the doorway, curtsying politely as she introduces herself as Elizabeth from House Leyston. Looking directly at the ambassador, Elizabeth asks Lucas to forgive her for concealing her true identity just to come and see him. Lucas gaps in utter astonishment upon recognizing Lady Elizabeth standing right inside his private quarters. Sweating nervously, the ambassador questions if she is not supposed to be locked away in jail. A subtle smile plays on Elizabeth's lips as she slyly replies that his understanding of her situation will make their conversation go much faster. With complete confidence and warmth, she announces that she would highly appreciate being granted political asylum within the empire. Lucas stammers in hesitation, trying to find a reason to object while noting that he understands her fury with Prince Fried. He attempts to reassure her by adding that the king and her father, the prime minister, will eventually return to handle the mess, so there is absolutely no need for that. But Elizabeth cuts him off seamlessly, addressing him by name. Our girl turns the conversation onto the current state of public opinion, directly asking Lucas if he is fully aware of the dreadful rumors spreading wildly about her. Looking away with an uncomfortable expression, Lucas softly sighs and admits that he is indeed aware of them. Elizabeth lets out a cynical, bright laugh as she details her grievances against the kingdom. She explains that the crown prince was not the only one who trampled over her, as even the regular citizens treated her just as terribly. Looking toward the ambassador, she points out that asking her to simply forget everything and still dedicate herself to this country is asking far too much. She places her hand over her chest, calmly explaining the depth of her political influence. She notes that she was deeply involved in the country's politics and partook in everything from administration to military affairs. Because of this massive role, she recognizes that her sudden disappearance will inevitably cause widespread unrest, and she is certain that many people will suffer because of it. Looking forward with clear conviction, she states plainly that the fate of the nation is simply no longer her problem. Elizabeth points out the complete unfairness of her situation while Mireille stands supportively behind her. She explains that she devoted all of her time and energy to the kingdom and its citizens, yet she received absolutely nothing but contempt in return for her dedication. Lucas directly asks Elizabeth what she intends to do next if he chooses to agree to her request. Looking toward him with a steady profile, Elizabeth's voice carries a chilling certainty as a close-up of her face shows her replying that her plan is really quite simple. Our girl places a hand over her heart. She boldly declares her ultimate goal, stating with absolute resolve that she will take revenge on the kingdom of Haldoria and crush it completely with her own two hands. Inside the private quarters, Lucas' voice shakes as he loudly asks Elizabeth if she truly wants to take revenge. Looking back at the ambassador, Elizabeth directly confirms that her goal is indeed to destroy the country. She placidly points out that while she is fairly strong, she cannot challenge an entire kingdom head-on. Lucas sweats nervously and struggles to comprehend the declaration, asking if that is really what she is implying. Looking out toward her, Lucas asks if she wants military backing from the Empire. Elizabeth details her strategic intent, explaining that since the Empire and her kingdom have always been at odds, she plans to utilize the Empire's strength to achieve her goal. Extending an open hand forward, she acknowledges the political reality by stating she knows he would not help her for free. Elizabeth's gaze turns fiercely intense and focused as she firmly clenches her hand into a tight fist. With complete resolve, she states that she will crush the kingdom and directly offer him the spoils of war. Lucas reflects on the terms of the arrangement, listening intently as Elizabeth adds that the alliance is a fair matter of give and take where they will both benefit from the collaboration. A bead of sweat rolls down his face as he processes the magnitude of the deal before closing his eyes and letting out a sigh, formally stating that he accepts the terms. He calmly announces that he will allow her to join their side. Lucas clarifies his immediate terms with a serious look, gesturing forward as he explains the conditions. He states that he cannot immediately send her to the imperial capital. Instead, he mandates that she must remain in his territory on the border until he finishes monitoring her, adding strictly that she will not be free to wander as she pleases. Looking down thoughtfully, Elizabeth receives the conditions. She states smoothly that the arrangement is fine by her, silently reflecting to herself that this temporary setup is more than enough for now. As the final details are settled late at night outside the building, Lucas voices his anticipation for a fruitful collaboration. Meanwhile, Elizabeth fixes her mind on the long path ahead, silently noting that she just needs to earn the ambassador's trust one step at a time. The scene then transitions to the massive stone walls of the northern gate at the royal capital of the Kingdom of Haldoria, where armed guards stand watch at the open entrance. A horse-drawn carriage rattles loudly along a tree-lined road as it approaches the heavy stone gateway. Suddenly, a commanding voice echoes from the side, ordering the carriage to halt immediately. The carriage driver confidently calls out to the guard, stating that he is with the Udyr Empire's ambassador and identifying the vehicle as Lord Lucas's carriage. Recognizing the high-status transport, the guard apologizes for stopping them and bids them to proceed. Inside the carriage, Lucas looks sideways with a bead of sweat on his face, lightly chiding Elizabeth not to jest when she comments that ambassadors surely receive special treatment and notes she would have never made it out of the capital so easily by herself. Lucas looks across the interior of the moving carriage and points out that Elizabeth managed to find her way out of the capital just fine on her own. Sitting comfortably on the opposite bench, Elizabeth offers a pleasant smile. Elizabeth turns her attention to the ambassador and praises his quick decision-making. She confidently states that even he would have struggled to sneak her out if he had hesitated any longer. Lucas looks over at her sideways with a tense, sweating profile, quietly absorbing her words. Lucas questions if it's because of her divine artifact. Elizabeth lets out a light chuckle and acknowledges that even the Empire is well aware of her unique power, as she raises her hand which begins to emit a brilliant, magical glow. Elizabeth proudly presents one of her powerful books, explaining that her grimoire of wisdom records any information she has seen or heard at least once. She admits that while she cannot use it as a weapon in the military sense, its pages hold countless state secrets, adding that her sudden absence will cause widespread unrest in the castle. Lucas watches her in silent amazement, staring at the glowing tome with a serious expression. Lucas shifts uncomfortably and asks Elizabeth if she should really be sharing all of this secret information with him. Elizabeth maintains a calm, composed profile as she firmly replies that since she is seeking refuge in the Empire, she fully intends to provide as much assistance as she possibly can. She silently questions why she would ever mind speaking about a grimoire that does not even exist. Elizabeth reflects internally on the massive web of deception she has spun surrounding her magical powers. She notes that the book she displayed is actually the Grimoire of Lucifer, which is one of the 7 grimoires and possesses entirely different capabilities beside the ones she just described. She thinks to herself that she fed the exact same lie to her father and the king, while Mireille stands nearby looking out the window, completely unaware that her lady has only ever revealed 4 of her true grimoires to her. In a chilling tone, she advises that he should absolutely not recommend handing her over to the imperial authorities. Lucas looks forward, letting out a confused exclamation as he struggles to comprehend her warning. Our girl quickly changes her demeanor back to a polite tone, offering her sincere thanks to Lord Lucas. She states that she deeply appreciates him letting her stay in his border territory and promises to fully repay her debt to him. Lucas looks back at her with a tensed face and a bead of sweat, trying to steady his nerves as she declares that she is absolutely sure of herself. Elizabeth continues her quiet warning, stating that she can offer more than the Emperor would if he ever decided to hand her over to the authorities. A few days pass by as the scene shifts to the Lebrick Viscounty, where town buildings line the streets. From the window of a traveling carriage, Elizabeth peers out with interest, observing a diverse crowd that includes animal-faced demi-humans and elves walking through the public paths. Elizabeth notes to the ambassador that she has noticed people of many different races living together in this place. Seated across from her inside the carriage, Lucas gestures warmly and explains that the Udyr Empire is highly diverse. Lucas explains from inside the carriage that many nations are under their rule, and they firmly believe in respecting every culture. As the horse-drawn carriage travels down the stone-paved street past the local citizens, he adds that his viscounty is located on the fringes of the empire, noting that there is also a nearby dungeon that is quite popular with adventurers. Looking out the window, Elizabeth sees young townspeople waving cheerfully and calling out to welcome their lord home. Amused by the warm reception, Elizabeth lets out a soft giggle, prompting a completely surprised and confused expression from Lucas. Elizabeth notes that he is quite popular among his people. Looking out toward the town buildings, Lucas explains that he may not look the part, but he treats his people earnestly. The scene then transitions to the interior of the Grand Lebrick residence. Lucas addresses Elizabeth over a freshly prepared tray of tea, asking if he may inquire about her future plans. Our girl lifts her teacup with a calm expression, stating that she has something else to address before delving into those details. Sitting across from him in the living area, Elizabeth directly tells Lord Lucas that she has 2 requests to make. Lucas listens closely from his position on the opposite couch, bidding her to go right ahead. Elizabeth states her first request, explaining that she would like his official approval to conduct business in this city. Looking down thoughtfully, she notes that after all, she will definitely need money if she is to accomplish anything moving forward. Lucas readily grants his permission, noting that he will allow it since he knows she used to manage a major firm. He adds that a promising business will surely strengthen the local economy. Hearing his compliance, Elizabeth politely offers her sincere thanks to the Lord. Our girl presents her second request with a pleasant smile, politely asking if he would kindly lend her 100 gold coins. Lucas stares back with a highly serious, analyzing expression, resting his chin on his fingers as he notes that she is asking for a truly significant sum. Elizabeth acknowledges his reaction, stating calmly that she can entirely understand his hesitation. She prompts him to take a look at a document she is holding out, prompting Luca to ask if that is a magic contract. Lucas gasps in absolute shock from across the room. Elizabeth gestures toward the signed document, outlining the high stakes of their agreement. She explains that the contract explicitly states she must pay back double the money within a single year, adding that if she fails to do so, she shall legally become his slave. Looking toward the page, she notes that he will either receive his money back or gain an incredibly valuable slave. Lucas panics completely at the dangerous proposition, sweating and shouting out to ask if she has completely lost her mind. Elizabeth remains totally unbothered by his outburst, simply questioning what the problem could possibly be. Gesturing confidently toward the space between them, she firmly declares that 1 year is all the time she will ever need to completely cover the table in gold. A clear sound echoes through the street as a hand opens the cloth pouch, revealing a small cluster of shiny round gold coins resting at the very top. Our girl smiles brightly as she holds a heavy cloth sack in both hands. With an optimistic tone, she announces that they have officially secured their starting capital. Standing in the middle of a stone-paved street, Elizabeth remarks that setting up a firm is highly expensive, warning that they must be careful with how they spend their funds. Looking up at her lady, Mireille listens attentively and firmly agrees with the assessment. Mireille points out the next logistical hurdles, explaining that they will need a building because an address is strictly required to register the new firm. Elizabeth listens thoughtfully, turning her profile to acknowledge the point for their budget. Elizabeth adopts a focused expression as she pinches a single coin between her fingers. Looking ahead, she states that they should simply make do with 1 gold coin. The scene transitions to the exterior of a heavily dilapidated, old house overgrown with thick vines and covered by boarded-up windows. Elizabeth and Mireille stand together on the dirt road outside. Mireille voices her concerns, pointing out that the entire house is completely in ruins. Elizabeth attempts to stay optimistic, reasoning with a nervous smile that nobody truly knows yet and suggesting it might look much better once they step inside. She then reaches her hand out toward the front door. The moment the door opens, a heavy thud echoes through the air as thick clouds of dust erupt from inside the dark building. Mireille panics immediately, frantically stating that this is absolutely no place for her lady, but Elizabeth firmly insists that they simply have no choice in the matter. Looking down at the broken building from the stone-paved street, Elizabeth calmly rationalizes their situation. She explains to her maid that they must make heavy compromises if they want to acquire a building and land for the price of just 1 gold coin. Our girl looks around the messy interior, noting that it is still far too dirty and deciding they should start by cleaning the place up. Mireille waves her hands in a panicked frenzy, begging her mistress to allow her to handle the chores instead. Turning her profile away with a calm look, Elizabeth quietly cuts her off by calling out Mireille's name. Elizabeth explicitly instructs Mireille to stop calling her my lady, explaining that because they are fugitives, they must avoid drawing any unnecessary attention until they have successfully restored their power. Mireille looks back in complete shock and confusion, frantically questioning what she should call her mistress instead. Elizabeth places a thoughtful hand against her chin, calmly deciding that she will go by the name Ellie Lays from now on. Sweating nervously, Mireille asks if the name Miss Ellie is fine, to which Elizabeth pleasantly agrees before directly asking if they shall finally begin cleaning up the property. So, from now on we are going to call her Ellie. Looking out toward the heavily boarded windows of the rundown building, Ellie silently marks the dilapidated house as their official new headquarters and the first true step toward achieving her absolute revenge. 3 days pass by as a hand carefully mounts a new wooden sign onto the exterior of the building. Stepping back as the installation is successfully completed, a voice proudly declares that the job is finally done. Mireille hangs the sign securely in place, which proudly reads Trader Commercial Firm in clear lettering. Turning back with a pleasant smile, she looks toward her mistress and asks how it looks to her. Looking up at the building's exterior from the street, Ellie smiles pleasantly and remarks to herself that Trader Commercial Firm has a very nice ring to it. Standing on the stone-paved street, Ellie ponders their business direction after Mireille asks if they will focus on selling cosmetics like before. Our girl clarifies that they will do so someday, but notes that they currently lack the necessary facilities or personnel for such an operation. Mireille stands by the latter and inquires what they will sell instead. Ellie confidently holds up a solid rectangular bar, presenting it with a bright smile as she declares that this item will serve as their very first product. The maid inspects the item closely and notes that it is quite nice, though she points out the market limitation that one can only sell so much soap. Ellie remains completely unfazed, stating calmly that her observation is perfectly fine because this initial venture is merely a stepping stone for their broader plans. The scene shifts to the interior of a quiet chapel within the Church of Ibris, where rows of empty wooden benches lead toward the altar. Ellie approaches a resident priest standing near a stone statue and offers a polite greeting. Placing a hand over her heart with a warm smile, she introduces herself as Ellie, explaining that she is starting a local business and came to pray for its success before politely asking if he minds if she sits down for a moment. The priest welcomes Ellie warmly, telling her to feel free. Suddenly, a child's voice calling out for their father cuts through the quiet chapel, causing Ellie to turn her head in surprise. A cheerful child runs forward with a bright smile, flashing a peace sign while happily announcing that they earned a lot today. Another smiling young boy follows closely behind him, loudly confirming the success. The priest praises the children for doing well, but gently requests that they tell him all about it later since he is currently busy with a visitor. The boys agree enthusiastically as a nun steps forward to guide them away from the altar area. Ellie listens quietly as the priest explains the situation behind the church's finances. He notes that they run an orphanage right next to the church, explaining that while their liege, Lord Lucas, officially sponsors them, the funding hardly covers all of the operational fees. The priest watches the children leave with the nun, explaining that after the orphans somehow found out about the money troubles, they decided to help by pulling weeds around the barracks and performing all kinds of odd jobs. He sighs that he is deeply ashamed to rely on children for support, but Ellie listens with a soft smile and kindly tells him not to be. Ellie smiles warmly at the priest, reassuring him that she is absolutely certain the children know exactly how much he cares for them. Our girl states that the priest's genuine care was clear at first glance. The priest looks up at her with a touched expression, softly replying that those are such kind words. Ellie places her hand gracefully over her chest and asks the priest to please allow her to offer a small contribution to the church. The priest smiles brightly and begins to express his sincere gratitude, but he suddenly freezes in complete shock as a heavy clink echoes through the room. He stares down at his own trembling hands in sheer disbelief, sweating as he realizes he is holding multiple gold coins. Panicking at the sight of the fortune, he exclaims that he cannot possibly accept such a large amount, but Ellie stands firm with her back turned, gently insisting that he keep it. She turns around with a bright, charming smile to ease the priest's worries. She asks what a merchant would ever be without customers, explaining that she sees future customers in these very children, and confidently adds that supporting them is simply a form of long-term investment to her. The priest watches Ellie leave with a deeply grateful expression, offering a soft murmur of thanks to her. Ellie walks gracefully down the empty stone-paved street of the town. As she passes by the timber-framed buildings, a familiar voice suddenly calls out her chosen name from behind. Mireille walks briskly forward along the path, reporting that she has successfully completed the task that was requested of her. Standing near the building, Ellie turns and directly asks how it went, to which Mireille confidently confirms that everything proceeded completely without a hitch. Mireille details her promotional efforts, explaining that she actively approached maids working for noble houses and provided them with the soap bars. She notes that she specifically told them the items were entirely free samples to generate interest. Walking together along the stone street, Ellie delivers her next instructions, stating that the soap will go on sale tomorrow exactly as planned and mandating that they must tightly control their stock instead of selling to just anyone. She adds that they should mark up their product to be slightly more expensive than the competition, prompting a worried look from Mireille as she hesitatingly asks if her lady is absolutely sure about the strategy. Looking toward her maid, she explains that quality soap like this could easily sell at a higher price. She calls out to Mireille, firmly reminding her that this entire venture is simply a stepping stone for their broader plans. Ellie outlines their strategy further, noting that they are actively aiming for brand recognition and building ties with highly influential people. She emphasizes that she wants people to see a bar of soap and immediately think of Trader, declaring with complete resolve that their true payback officially starts tomorrow. Turning around with a vibrant, cheerful smile, she encourages Mireille to come on, excitedly shouting that they are going to make an absolute killing. Inside the building holding the sign for the Trader commercial firm, Mireille presents the latest financial documents to Ellie, announcing that she has brought the earnings for the month. Looking down attentively, Ellie rustles through the paperwork as she prepares to review the firm's progress. Our girl breaks into a confident, knowing smile as she reflects on their commercial journey, noting internally that exactly 3 months have passed since their very first bars of soap hit the market shelves. Ellie notes that skincare products are bound to captivate noble ladies no matter where they go. She remembers how their clever strategy of distributing free samples to local maids succeeded completely in sparking the curiosity and interest of their high society masters, allowing their overall sales to steadily grow. Ellie inquires from her seat about how their latest face lotion, body milk, and shampoo lines are faring. Standing with her back turned to check their inventory shelves, Mireille reports that absolutely everything has sold out completely and they are already fully booked on customer pre-orders, adding that anyone who catches wind of their products immediately bombards the firm with requests. Ellie looks up from her desk and instructs Mireille to carefully survey all potential customers and only accept a chosen handful of them. Ellie reaches forward with another document to show her. Our girl instructs Mireille to share the usual amount of their earnings between the orphanage and their other regular charities. Mireille readily complies, noting that the resident priest will undoubtedly be as grateful for the support as ever. Looking over her records, Ellie voices her profound satisfaction regarding their strategic alliance, noting that she is genuinely glad they formed good relations with the Church of Ibris. Observing that her mistress has been working hard, Ellie pauses and thoughtfully suggests taking a little break. The maid offers to bring a light meal over to ease the burden of the day's tasks. Ellie declines the offer of a light snack, stating that there is no need since she is absolutely starved. Smiling cheerfully, she instead suggests going out for a proper meal together. Seated at a lively local tavern with plates of sausages and side dishes laid out before them, Ellie observes that Trader has successfully built an impressive reputation and become quite famous. She declares that it is finally time for them to take things up a notch. Mireille firmly agrees with the plan to elevate their business, reminding her mistress that they must act as quickly as possible. She emphasizes that the clock is steadily ticking down on the strict financial contract Ellie signed with Lord Lucas. Hearing the reminder, Ellie shifts the conversation toward their commercial opposition, directly asking how their main competitor is currently doing. Mireille reports on the rival company, explaining that the Gazaru commercial firm has not done anything suspicious or conspicuous just yet. Hearing the update, Ellie sits thoughtfully at the table and tells Mireille to keep a very close eye on them. Our girl thoughtfully places a finger near her lips, reasoning that it must irritate the rival firm to watch them simply walk in and steal their wealthiest customers. She reflects that the competition will undoubtedly try to get even, adding that she heavily doubts they are above using dirty tricks to undermine them. Turning fully toward her maid, she commands Mireille to make absolutely sure of a critical precaution. Ellie demands that they ensure the competition never gets their hands on the secret soap recipe. She explicitly stresses to Mireille that this high-quality product is their ultimate lifeline. Mireille reassures her mistress, stating that she is fully aware of the stakes and confirming that the recipe is securely locked away inside the firm's vault, so there is no need to worry. Ellie replies that this is very good to hear, entirely unaware that a nearby person with wavy hair is quietly listening to their entire conversation in total silence. Inside the grand office of the Gazaru commercial firm, a furious uproar shatters the silence as an object is violently smashed against the floor. Gazaru Jackman, the chair of the firm, shakes his clenched fist in absolute rage while loudly cursing the insufferable brats who are disrupting his business. Slamming his hand down onto his desk, Gazaru aggressively vents his frustration, shouting that Trader keeps taking their valuable customers. Watching the intense outburst with a worried look, his standing assistant raises a hand and frantically begs his superior to please calm down. The assistant tries to rationalize the situation, noting that while their own toiletry line is currently underperforming, the firm itself is still going quite strong. He adds that Trader is merely a small company struggling to fulfill its orders and expand, but Gazaru Jackman immediately cuts him off by harshly branding him a total fool. Turning his head away in sheer anger, he barks out that the rival firm is deliberately hand-picking their customers strictly to spite them. The unexpected revelation leaves his assistant standing behind him in complete shock. Gazaru continues his furious explanation, gritting his teeth as he notes that Trader is actively rejecting unruly customers. Gazaru grits his teeth as he reviews their commercial decline, noting with great annoyance that some of their buyers have openly started complaining about the quality of their own soap. He reflects that these customers used to love their product, but now they are aggressively demanding that the firm stock Trader's superior goods instead. He points out that Trader's carefully selected customers are incredibly influential within high society. He warns that if they choose to target Trader directly, the rival firm will easily wield that elite customer base against them. Suddenly, a sharp knocking sound rings out from the office door, cutting through their discussion. The office door opens slightly to reveal a wavy-haired man named Grants, who nervously steps inside and asks to be excused. Gazaru immediately snaps at the interruption, aggressively demanding to know what he wants and questioning if he has simply come to bother him for money again. He barks that Grants has a lot of nerve showing up considering he never contributes anything, while his assistant looks on as Grants frantically tries to explain that he is misunderstood. Standing with his arms tightly crossed, Gazaru looks super irritated as Grant stammers over his words, completely unable to finish his sentence. Losing the last of his patience, Gazaru lets out a ferocious roar and commands him to spit it out, completely terrifying Grants in the process. Grants frantically panics under the immense pressure, desperately shouting out that he has valuable information regarding the Trader commercial firm. Hearing the sudden revelation, Gazaru instantly shifts his demeanor, narrowing his eyes with a cold gaze, to question if that is truly the case. Losing his patience with the standing assistant, Gazaru bluntly orders him to get out of his sight. The assistant quickly complies and promises to leave at once. Left standing in the room, Grants lowers his head with a look of deep worry and hesitantly confesses that he overheard the girls talking. Grants explains that they explicitly said their secret soap recipe is locked away inside their firm's safe. Gazaru absorbs the strategic revelation, narrowing his eyes with a highly serious look to demand if Grants is absolutely sure about this information. He directly asks exactly where Grants managed to hear such a thing. Grants looks back and clarifies that he personally saw the girls from Trader at a downtown restaurant. Grants details the encounter, explaining how both Ellie and Mireille sat right behind his table completely by chance. He notes that while they were whispering their plans, he knows exactly what he heard. Gazaru places a thoughtful hand to his chin, quietly murmuring that he sees what is going on. He calculates the massive potential of the situation, reflecting internally that he could easily sell the exact same high-quality soap himself if he simply managed to seize their secret recipe. A dark, plotting grin begins to spread across his face as a malicious thought takes firm hold of his mind. Gazaru continues plotting in secret, noting to himself that the Trader brand name is starting to carry serious weight in the local market. He schemes that selling his own manufactured version under their established identity would guarantee far greater financial profits, realizing he can easily pretend that he merely bought a batch of their soap to resell it. He calculates his next financial move, realizing that once the name is yours, he could easily mark up the retail price by several times what Trader currently charges. Suddenly, he turns his focus back to the room and loudly calls out Grants's name, causing the wavy-haired man to let out a startled flinch and frantically respond. With a firm, authoritative tone, Gazaru commands Grants to forget absolutely everything he just heard regarding the rival firm. As he delivers the instruction, he tosses a jingling pouch of coins across the room, leaving Grant staring down at the money in complete dismay while questioning the sudden order to stay quiet. Gazaru narrows his eyes into a fierce, intimidating glare, aggressively demanding to know if he has not made himself perfectly clear. Terrified by the intense pressure, Grants quickly shouts out his compliance before the heavy office door is violently slammed shut behind him. Alone at last, a sinister chuckle escapes Gazaru's lips as his malicious plan falls perfectly into place. Standing alone in the center of his lavish office, he throws his arms out wide and lets out a roar of laughter. Gazaru Jackman a malicious, calculating smirk as he vows to make those insufferable brats wait and see, confidently declaring to himself that he will show them exactly how grown-ups do business. 2 full months pass by in the territory. Adjusting the elegant cravat around her neck, Ellie looks forward into a mirror with a confident expression, quietly murmuring to herself that everything is absolutely perfect. As Ellie enters the main room, Mireille greets her warmly with a cheerful good morning, adding that she is nearly finished preparing their breakfast. Ellie accepts the pleasant update, offering a polite word of thanks. Suddenly, a soft bird call draws Mireille's attention toward the nearby open window. Mireille gently receives a small messenger bird at the window, noting immediately that she has obtained this month's official report directly from the capital. Looking over with focused interest, Ellie directly asks what piece of news the report contains. Mireille delivers the detailed text from the capital, explaining that Lady Sylvia Lockett has officially become His Highness Prince Fried's new fiancée. She nearly utters a harsh insult about the woman before catching her words, while a vibrant image of the smiling prince holding Sylvia close amidst a backdrop of lilies highlights the distant situation. She lets out a sudden gasp of shock as she scans the contents of the newly arrived report. Ellie watches her from across the room and calls out her name, sensing the sudden tension. Clenching the document tightly in her hands, Mireille looks toward her mistress with a deeply troubled expression, struggling to find the words to deliver the rest of the news. She directly reveals the devastating truth from the capital, explaining that Ellie has officially been declared an enemy of the kingdom and is actively wanted for high treason. Narrowing her eyes with a cold, analytical gaze, Ellie quietly observes that this development sounds exactly like the doing of her father, Duke Leyston. Ellie calmly processes the betrayal, noting that her father is throwing her to the wolves by affirming Prince Fried's false claims strictly so he can protect his own position and the royal family's prestige. Hearing this ruthless strategy, Mireille panics completely in the background, shouting out in absolute disbelief that a father could be willing to completely discard his own daughter. Looking away with a serious profile, Ellie reflects deeply on her father's true nature, recognizing that Duke Leyston has only ever been concerned about the state of the kingdom and the royal family. She realizes that her sudden disappearance from the prison cell merely pushed him to defend the prince's honor entirely at her own expense. Mireille reacts with deep disgust, denouncing Duke Leyston as a total monster for abandoning his family. Ellie calmly responds that she is incredibly angry as well, but for the time being, she focuses on the task at hand. Taking the written report into her own hands, she moves decisively to deal with the document. Ellie raises her hand and uses her magic to set the treason document ablaze, calmly stating that she is far too busy to let this setback bother her. As the paperwork crumbles into a bright fire, Ellie declares that her grand revenge is already well underway. She reflects coldly that the flames of her fury will completely devour her enemies in due time. Ellie turns away from the fire, noting with chilling finality that she will not stop until nothing but ashes remain of the kingdom. Watching her mistress deliver the severe warning with absolute resolve, Mireille looks on with a deeply worried expression, softly whispering Ellie's name. The intense atmosphere is suddenly shattered as a loud, aggressive banging echoes from the entrance. Ellie looks up from the main table in surprise, questioning who could possibly be visiting them this early in the morning. Mireille quickly volunteers to answer the door and steps forward to open it. However, the moment she looks out, her face turns pale with shock, frantically yelling out a command to wait as a sudden wave of panic takes hold. Ignoring Mireille's desperate warning, a group of armed guards forcefully burst straight through the entrance with heavy thuds. They stride aggressively into the room, surrounding Ellie and Mireille within their own headquarters. Mireille reacts furiously to the sudden intrusion, shouting out to ask what they think they are doing. A stern-faced official wearing glasses commands her not to move. The glasses-wearing official steps forward to face her target directly, looking straight at Ellie and coldly addressing her as Ellie Lays, chair of the trader commercial firm. With absolute authority, she firmly announces that Ellie is officially under arrest, prompting a fierce, unwavering glare from the young noble lady. Faced with the sudden declaration of arrest, Ellie calmly addresses the intruders, stating that such an action is completely impossible since she does not even know who they are. The glasses-wearing official adjusts her position, asking for forgiveness and noting that she should have introduced herself first. She formally announces that her name is Arte Hilgerty, and she serves as an investigator for the Merchants Guild's legal department. Arte delivers the serious accusation, stating that they heavily suspect the trader commercial firm of manufacturing and selling toxic soap. Hearing the specific charge, Ellie narrows her eyes in disbelief, quietly repeating the words toxic soap back to herself. Arte explains the reasoning behind the investigation, noting that many buyers have officially reported suffering from severe skin burns and painful inflammation shortly after using traders' products. Adjusting her glasses with a gloved hand, Arte delivers her final command, declaring that Ellie and her partner, Mireille Katerina, must immediately accompany them to the guild headquarters for formal questioning. Closing her eyes with a calm expression, Ellie concedes to the investigation, stating that although her firm has done absolutely nothing wrong, they will fully cooperate. The scene shifts to the Merchants Guild HQ. Reviewing the provided documentation, Arte notes that traders' soap-making process does not appear to be toxic or dangerous. Ellie stands nearby, listening to the investigator's assessment with a calm, confident smile. Sitting across the table, Ellie calmly defends her business, pointing out that none of their customers have ever complained about adverse reactions. She firmly adds that she does not recall ever selling anything to the victims in question. Arte looks down at her paperwork with a serious expression, officially declaring that everything checks out and trader is in the clear. However, she wonders aloud where the dangerous soap actually came from, prompting Ellie to politely interrupt and ask if she may make a suggestion. With a cheerful smile and a raised finger, Ellie asks if she could personally examine the toxic soap in question. She explains to the surprised guard standing nearby that she is the original creator of Trader's recipe, making her uniquely qualified to inspect it. Ellie suggests she might indeed figure something out upon seeing it. Arte considers the suggestion, muttering that it stands to reason. Turning slightly, the investigator commands her accompanying guards to bring the soap forward. An armed guard steps up and extends his arm across the table, announcing that here it is. Ellie looks toward the offering. The object is revealed to be a rectangular bar of soap resting inside a piece of paper, stamped with a distinctive crest. Extending her hands to take it, Ellie requests to let her see it as she prepares for a close inspection. Our girl holds the product up to the light, critically observing that the execution is unrefined, but the overall color and appearance match their own. Her gaze turns intensely sharp as a sudden, suspicious thought crosses her mind, leaving her to silently question what this could possibly mean. Looking forward with an intense expression, Ellie presents the bar and shares her working theory, stating that the person who manufactured this product must have stolen a part of their secret recipe. Sweating slightly, Arte looks back in surprise and asks what she means by that. Ellie calmly explains that their soap recipe is so incredibly important that they deliberately separated it into two distinct halves, noting that they keep the first half locked away inside a safe. She holds up a piece of paper, noting that the crucial second half is always kept directly on her person. Ellie explains that using only the first half of the formula results in a toxic product, and one must perform the detailed steps in the second half for it to be completely safe. Arte listens closely, quickly connecting the dots based on this explanation. Seated across the desk from Ellie, Arte concludes that the true culprit must have stolen the formula without realizing it was incomplete, and then proceeded to sell the resulting toxic soap. Ellie remains calm on her side of the table, confirming that this is most likely what occurred. Ellie raises a finger to offer a practical piece of advice, suggesting that the investigator question the victims directly to find the culprits. She adds that the mysterious seller simply disguised themselves as trader to pull off the scheme, while Arte and her accompanying guard take in her strategic suggestion. Arte states that while the case officially remains open, they have successfully proved Ellie's innocence, adding that trader appears to be another victim in this plot. She bows down deeply before the desk, offering a sincere apology for putting Ellie through such a stressful ordeal. Ellie gently reassures the investigator by stating that she was only doing her job. Looking forward with clear conviction, she firmly notes that the true culprit behind this entire plot is the one who should apologize, not her. Arte expresses her gratitude to Ellie for her understanding, promising that she will contact them immediately if any new details come to light regarding the case. Ellie responds with a polite smile, stating that she truly appreciates the investigator's thoroughness. Inside the grand building of the Gazaru commercial firm, an enraged shout echoes through the walls. Gazaru stares down at an official document. Sweating heavily, he aggressively demands to know the meaning behind these ridiculous charges, panicking as he realizes that they had copied Trader's recipe word for word. He is left staring in utter disbelief, wondering frantically if they had unknowingly used a fake recipe. He grips his head in sheer panic, recognizing that the situation is incredibly bad. He realizes with horror that if the guild decides to question their customers, they will instantly figure everything out. Suddenly, a firm voice calls out from the doorway to interrupt his frantic thoughts. Arte stands tall in the doorway alongside an armored guard, adjusting her glasses as she introduces them as members of the legal department of the Merchants Guild. Looking directly at the startled businessman, she demands validation by asking if he is indeed Gazaru, the chair of the Gazaru commercial firm. Faced with the guild investigator, Gazaru begins to sweat heavily as Arte delivers her sharp terms. She stares at him with a cold, piercing gaze, declaring that she has serious questions regarding the toxic soap incidents and holds reasons to believe he may be directly involved in a burglary. At the Merchant Guild HQ, Arte leads the investigation forward, strictly requesting that the parties follow her. Sometime later, she speaks directly to Ellie, apologizing sincerely for taking up her time once again. Our girl notes how remarkably fast they managed to track down the true culprit. Arte explains that he did not even attempt to conceal his trail, which made their overall job very simple. Ellie places a thoughtful hand against her chin, reflecting on the sheer boldness of the plot and noting with surprise that the man was quite audacious. The true perpetrator is explicitly revealed as Gazaru Jackman. Arte recounts how the cornered businessman quickly crumbled under the guild's pressure, confessing fully that he had ordered his own subordinates to break in and steal the secret soap recipe. Standing on the grand stairs of the headquarters, Arte outlines the legal consequences, stating firmly that they will officially expel him from the Merchants Guild. Placing a gloved hand over her chest, she notes with regret that the guild lacks the authority to rule over civil cases, advising Ellie that since he has dragged Trader's name through the mud, she should take the matter to the Church of Ibris if she wishes to seek proper reparations. Ellie smiles gently and raises a finger to her face, assuring the guild investigator that she is fully aware of the situation and asks her to please not worry about it. Approaching a set of sturdy iron bars, Ellie greets the man locked inside, introducing herself as Ellie Lays from Trader and noting that it is a pleasure to finally make his acquaintance. Sitting behind the bars, a grim and serious Gazaru stares back at her coldly. Ellie gets straight to the point, calmly declaring that she is here to request reparation for the harm done to her firm. Standing behind the cell gate, Gazaru smirks slightly, admitting that while he was wrong, his compliance ends there. Gazaru narrows his eyes into a sharp, defiant glare and delivers a cold refusal, stating firmly that he will not give her a single thing. Turning his back to the cell gate, Gazaru lets out a mocking laugh, challenging Ellie that if she wants money, she will have to drag him to trial. He confidently adds that he highly doubts the church will even bother with her petty accusations. Unfazed by his arrogance, a knowing smile spreads across Ellie's face as she softly muses to herself that she wonders if that is truly the case. Alongside a smiling Ellie, a highly prominent figure steps directly into view, wearing holy vestments and a distinct cross necklace. Gazaru sweats heavily and stammers in absolute shock, immediately recognizing the man as Bishop Luis. Gazaru grips the cell bars in utter disbelief, loudly questioning how a mere brat like Ellie could possibly have managed to bring someone of such high status to his cell. Bishop Luis immediately cuts him off with a cold, stern tone, commanding the locked-away merchant to watch his words and directly addressing him as a sinner. The holy man declares firmly that Miss Ellie is a deeply devout believer, announcing that God will absolutely not suffer to have her honor or name tarnished by anyone. Extending an authoritative hand forward, Bishop Luis focuses his cold gaze directly on the prisoner, calling out Gazaru by his full name. In a booming, definitive tone, the bishop commands him to atone for his wicked actions in the name of God. Standing behind the cell gates, Ellie steps forward with a knowing smile, calmly noting that the Inquisitor's official approval now entitles her to claim all of his assets. Standing with her hands folded politely before her, our girl delivers the crushing final terms of her reparation. Looking directly at the panicked merchant, she calmly declares that she shall ask for his entire personal fortune as well as his firm, explicitly clarifying that this takeover includes all operating rights, employees, buildings, and raw materials. Ellie calmly notes that seizing everything he owns should perfectly remedy all the commercial damage done to Trader. She looks down toward the cell and delivers her final, crushing judgment, stating softly that she is afraid his luck has completely run out. As they stand near the grand staircase at the Merchants Guild headquarters, Guild investigator Arte addresses Ellie by her chosen name, offering another formal apology for the trouble. Ellie turns with a calm, pleasant expression and tells Arte not to worry about it, reassuring the investigator that none of this situation was her fault. Arte looks on with a serious expression and states that there is one final piece of information to share. She explains to Ellie that it looks like someone else actively pushed Gazara Jackman to steal from her company, a revelation that catches Ellie completely by surprise. Arte reveals that the legal department believes Gazara's accountant, Grants Carlton, is the true mastermind behind the corporate sabotage. She reluctantly notes that the guild's hands are completely tied because they currently lack any concrete proof to charge him. Ellie places a thoughtful finger to her chin, absorbing the update and quietly murmuring that she sees what is going on. Ellie calculates the broader legal situation, realizing that because Gazara's firm was recently merged with hers, Grants has now officially become her own employee. Humming softly to herself in front of Arte, Ellie wonders what she should do with him next. Our girl looks toward the guild investigator and requests to have the accountant left entirely to her. Arte agrees to the arrangement, only asking that Ellie remain careful as she deals with him. Upon returning to the firm's headquarters, Mireille Katerina warmly welcomes her mistress back. Ellie checks to see if a certain person has arrived, and Mireille confirms that she has already called for him, telling Ellie that he may enter the room. Grants enters the office looking deeply anxious and tries to speak, but Ellie instantly cuts him off. Adopting a cold, uncompromising stance, she demands that they skip the pleasantries, stating that he must already know exactly what she is about to say to him. The intense atmosphere causes Grants to swallow hard as he nervously stammers out a weak confirmation. Looking at him with a sharp gaze, Ellie speaks his name directly to command his full attention. Instead of delivering a harsh punishment, Ellie surprises the trembling accountant by handing him a heavy pouch of money. She smiles calmly and tells Grants that this is the official reward for his magnificent work. Fulfilling her side of their agreement, our girl announces that Grants shall officially become an executive at Trader. As Grant stammers in complete shock, she calmly adds that she will inform the Merchants Guild that she has forgiven him because he showed genuine remorse. Grants bows deeply as a wave of immense gratitude washes over him, offering his sincere thanks to his new employer. Ellie recalls about the previous and thinks that Grants was the exact person Ellie had instructed Mireille to contact in order to secure a highly worthwhile deal. Ellie calculates the steps of her operation, reflecting on how she discovered Gazaru's dodgy business methods after initiating an investigation into his firm. Realizing that only serious charges would actually get the rival chair convicted, she had subtly used Grants to encourage Gazaru to steal the incomplete recipe, walking him directly into her trap. Grants nervously tries to get her attention, but Ellie looks back with a sharp profile and firmly states that she did not forget their arrangements. Ellie notes that there is still another vital promise she must fulfill. The scene transitions to the interior of a quiet room, where a young woman with her hair tied up sits with her hands clasped tightly together, desperately praying to God. Suddenly, the quiet atmosphere is shattered as a door is violently slammed open, catching the praying girl completely off guard. Grant steps hurriedly through the open doorway and breathlessly announces his return. The frantic young woman immediately demands to know where he has been all this time, asking how he could possibly leave when Lunoa is currently in such a terrible state. Before the confrontation can escalate, Ellie calmly steps up behind him and politely requests to enter the room. Ellie gracefully introduces herself to the family as the chair of the Trader commercial firm, gently adding that she has already heard all about their daughter. She reassures the shocked mother to please stay calm, explaining that Grants was actively doing his absolute best for the sake of their daughter. As they gather closely around the small bed inside the room, Ellie looks down at the family's situation with a somber expression. Gazing at the quiet scene, she softly notes to herself what a poor child she is. Lunoa lies completely still beneath the heavy blankets. She explains the tragic accident that has befallen the family, noting that a passing carriage violently hit their dear Lunoa. Grants looks on with a deeply sorrowful expression, detailing their desperate financial struggle to Ellie. He reveals that absolutely all of their family's savings went into purchasing expensive potions, but sadly admits that her condition simply will not improve unless they can find a way to use powerful healing magic. Ellie opens her grimoire and tells Grants to calm down, reassuring him that his daughter will make a full recovery with some of her magic. As she reaches for the book, Grants looks over at her in utter astonishment and asks what it is, prompting her to simply reply that it is a special item. Our girl smiles brightly at Grants, telling him that it is a magic item that will strengthen her spell. While she flips the pages of her book, her inner thoughts reveal that this explanation is actually a lie, noting to herself that she simply cannot tell him about her divine artifact. Holding the open book as a bright light begins to emanate from its pages, Ellie focuses her mind on the spell. She reflects internally that the grimoire of Beelzebub has the unique power to mimic spells, noting how fortunately she had recorded the most effective healing spell of the kingdom's archbishop so that she can now cast it herself. Ellie invokes the powerful healing magic directly over the bedside, causing a gentle, shimmering glow to envelop the injured child. Suddenly, Lunoa stirs slightly and softly opens her eyes to call out for her father, prompting Grants and his wife to cry out in absolute joy and relief at their daughter's miraculous recovery. Ellie gently advises them that healing magic takes a toll on the patient's body, kindly requesting that they make sure to feed her plenty of nutritious dishes. Grants asks how they can possibly thank her for saving their daughter, but Ellie laughs softly and explains that she has merely honored their official agreement. Placing a playful finger to her lips, she pleasantly requests that they keep the true nature of her magical abilities a strict secret between them. Our girl explains to the family that she cannot cast that powerful healing spell very often. Deeply moved by her incredible help, Grants immediately promises that they will do anything she needs in return, while his wife stands closely beside him with a highly grateful look. The family eagerly declares that they will not breathe a single word about her abilities. Ellie smiles softly and replies that everything is all right. As the whole Gazaru affair officially comes to a close, Ellie reflects internally on her growing empire, noting that she now possesses a large company complete with established trade routes, a vast customer base, and highly loyal employees. Reflecting on her immense business success, Ellie feels a surge of ultimate confidence. She realizes that she now has everything she needs to expand her commercial business in one magnificent go. 1 month later, inside a lavishly decorated room, Lucas holds a hand to his forehead with an expression of pure disbelief. Looking overwhelmed by the rapid turn of events, he wonders aloud who could have ever predicted what would happen over the course of just 6 months. Lucas stares down at the table, completely astounded that 6 months would be more than enough time for Ellie to turn a mere 100 coins into a massive, towering pile of solid gold. Standing gracefully beside him, Ellie smiles with absolute satisfaction as she delivers on the strict financial contract she originally signed. Looking at the massive fortune piled up on the table, Ellie reminds Lord Lucas about her initial promise to make helping her highly worth his while. Lord Lucas begins to address her as Lady Elizabeth, but quickly catches himself and corrects his wording to call her Miss Ellie instead. Impressed by her incredible business acumen, Lord Lucas declares that he hereby officially allows her to wander the empire exactly as she sees fit, explicitly extending this special freedom to include the capital city. Hearing the proclamation, Ellie places a finger to her lip in mild surprise. Our girl asks if he is absolutely certain about making such a bold decision. Lucas explains that since he already knows she is actively wanted for high treason, he strongly doubts that any of this situation is a ploy, leading him to fully trust her. Ellie breaks into a cheerful smile and politely offers her sincere thanks to Lucas for placing his trust in her. Lucas turns away slightly with his arms crossed, looking flustered as he trails off his sentence by starting to say that she is just something. This unexpected reaction leaves Ellie looking back toward him with a completely puzzled expression. Lucas looks down at the gold coins and changes his mind, deciding it is better to leave the thought alone. Sometime later at the firm's headquarters, Ellie sits diligently at her desk sorting through tall stacks of paperwork while Mireille Katerina prepares tea by the window. Ellie passes a heavy pouch over to her maid, prompting Mireille to check if the funds are meant for the church, to which Ellie readily confirms. Our girl continues reflecting to herself that keeping the Church of Ibris on her side will be highly beneficial in the long run. She feels confident that they will protect her, granted she does not commit a sin. Her thoughts are suddenly broken by a sharp knock at the door, prompting her to look up and call out for the visitor to come in. A young girl steps into the private study and announces her arrival, explaining that she has brought the requested documents regarding the capital. Standing at her desk with Mireille nearby, Ellie smiles warmly and directly tells Lunoa that her effort is highly appreciated. Looking over the incoming paperwork, Ellie praises Lunoa by noting that she has certainly settled into her new apprenticeship very quickly. Lunoa looks back completely overwhelmed with wide, panicked eyes, flusteredly waving her hands as she claims there is no way that is true since she still has so much left to learn. Lunoa shifts to a deeply emotional look, declaring to Ellie that it's just she saved her life and that she simply wants to do her absolute best in return. Admiring her sincere dedication, Ellie responds that she is highly reliable, prompting a joyful thank you from Lunoa as she prepares to take her leave. The moment the door firmly shuts behind the departing assistant, Ellie turns toward her maid and speaks Mireille's name to give her a silent cue. Instantly understanding the command, Mireille moves over to tightly close the room's main door to ensure absolute privacy. Left undisturbed, Ellie extends her gloved hand as a bright, glowing essence manifests above her palm, silently reflecting on the power of her divine artifact. Ellie raises her divine artifact and explicitly calls forth the grimoire of Belphegor. Looking down at the open pages with absolute focus, a faint mystical light begins to dance around her. She reflects on her magical arsenal, noting internally that the grimoire of Belphegor is another one of her grimoires, which specifically records the various contracts she has made with otherworldly entities and allows her to use their distinct powers at a cost. She begins her incantation, calling upon the great spirits to let their wings guide them through the distant azure sky. Pinching a single metal piece between her fingers, Ellie addresses the messengers of the god of wind and travel, offering a silver coin in strict accordance with their contract. She commands them to heed her call and officially executes the summon as a bright flash of light erupts across the room. The magical light fades to reveal multiple small, white saint birds gathering peacefully around her hands and shoulders. Looking at her newly summoned messengers with a calm smile, Ellie tells them that she is counting on them to successfully deliver her messages. As the small birds flap their wings and fly out through the window, Ellie turns back toward her desk and explains her broader strategy to Mireille. She notes that she will absolutely need the vital support of her former business partners once she arrives in the capital, confidently adding that because they have always been exemplary, she is certain they will join her side quickly. Mireille looks on attentively, pondering the true weight of her mistress's words. Ellie smiles with a look of quiet intensity. She notes to herself that they have finally received Lucas's official permission to travel, and questions whether they shouldn't make the absolute most of this perfect opportunity. Looking out over her workspace, Ellie plots her next move. She declares that the very minute everything is completely ready, they will be off straight for the capital. 6 full months pass by in the territory. The scene transitions to the office, where a heavy wooden door is pushed slightly ajar as a polite voice calls out from the entrance to ask for permission to enter. Grant Carlton steps into the room, asking if Miss Ellie called for him. Standing by her desk, Ellie welcomes him warmly, explaining that she has a very big announcement to make and explicitly wants him to be the first person to know about it. Our girl breaks into a confident smile, noting how Trader has grown tremendously over the past 6 months. She formally announces that she has decided to expand their business and start another official branch right in the imperial capital, prompting a deeply excited and joyful reaction from Grants. Addressing her newly appointed executive, Ellie explicitly announces that she has chosen Grants to replace her as the chair of the firm while she is away. The unexpected news leaves Grants pointing at himself in absolute shock, stammering in complete disbelief. Ellie places her hands confidently on Grants' shoulders, reassuring him that he is more than capable enough to serve as her proxy. Looking directly at the startled accountant, she directly asks if he is up for the task. Grants eagerly accepts the immense responsibility with a loud exclamation of agreement from within the room. Outside, a large wooden carriage wheel rests on the dirt path as Ellie notes that the elite social season will be starting very soon. Seated comfortably inside the moving carriage, Ellie speaks gently to her young apprentice, Lunoa. She notes that while Lunoa is still far too young to officially enter high society, she is certain that the girl will gain incredibly great experience at the capital, which serves as the true heart of the empire. She encourages her apprentice to focus entirely on learning, prompting an enthusiastic response from a smiling Lunoa. Suddenly, the carriage intensely rattles and jolts along the road, catching both of them completely off guard as they shout out in surprise. As the carriage moves down the road, Ellie instructs Mireille to tread carefully. Mireille calmly responds that she is fully aware of the situation. Inside the carriage, a curious Lunoa turns to her mistress and asks why she told Mireille to be careful, prompting Ellie to begin explaining her reasoning. Suddenly, a loud whoosh shatters the air as an arrow flies through the carriage window, landing with a heavy thud right into the wooden frame next to Lunoa. Lunoa panics instantly, screaming out in utter terror as the projectile narrowly misses her head, while Ellie watches the unfolding ambush. Maintaining absolute composure, Ellie continues her explanation, noting that soldiers never patrol these overgrown roads properly. Ellie concludes by saying the circumstance allows brigands to take over and do exactly as they wish. A scarred, bald bandit steps out from the woods with a mocking smirk, drawing his sword and telling the travelers that they live very dangerously. The bandits surround the carriage on the dirt road, mockingly asking the girls if they completely forgot to bring an escort for their journey. Sensing the immediate threat, Ellie looks toward her maid and firmly commands Mireille to protect Lunoa, to which Mireille immediately acknowledges. The bald brigand lets out a mocking laugh, asking if the young lady is honestly planning to fight all of them completely on her own. Stepping down firmly from the wooden carriage, Ellie maintains a serious look as she grips her sword and calmly declares that she absolutely is. The bald bandit laughs loudly at her courage, confidently declaring to his crew that they will take good care of her. In response to the threat, Ellie calmly narrows her eyes and raises her hand, dismissively stating that there is absolutely no need for that. Suddenly, a powerful shockwave erupts without warning, sending multiple bandits flying through the air with agonizing screams as they cough up blood. The bald leader panics in sheer disbelief, realizing that she used silent casting and must be a high-level mage, desperately yelling at his remaining men to surround her at once. As the frantic bandits shout to prevent her from using any more magic, Ellie stands perfectly unfazed. Looking ahead with a sharp, piercing gaze, she coldly remarks that she does not even need to rely on magic to deal with their kind. In a flash of incredible speed, Ellie draws her blade and unleashes a swift, blinding slash that cuts down the attackers. The remaining bandits are left completely stunned and disoriented by her martial prowess, letting out gasps of utter confusion as they fall. Terrified by her overwhelming power, the defeated leader collapses to the ground in total panic, frantically begging her to wait and loudly declaring his surrender. Ellie looks down at the trembling man with a cold, unimpressed expression, quietly questioning his sudden change of heart. The defeated bandit leader tries to justify his actions, crying out that he is actually just a simple farmer who had no choice. He states that he simply could not afford to live with all of the crushing taxes, but Ellie listens with a cold expression, calmly murmuring that she sees what he is trying to do. Before the man can say another word, a sharp whoosh cuts through the air as Ellie swings her blade with blinding speed. The bandit lets out a startled gasp of confusion as Ellie firmly states that she does not want to hear any of his excuses. Standing tall with her sword drawn, our girl looks down at the field with absolute authority. She declares that nothing the brigand says will ever change the fact that he is a criminal, noting coldly that as a merchant, she simply cannot go around forgiving bandits. Ellie turns back toward the carriage and announces to the group that the ordeal is over, kindly asking Lunoa if she is hurt. Mireille stands close by as a trembling Lunoa replies that she is fine, though she nervously stammers to ask if Ellie actually killed the attackers. Hearing the heavy question, Lunoa lets out a sharp jolt of fear. Our girl reasons that brigands are just like goblins and orcs because they choose to use raw force to steal the fruit of merchants' hard labor, and sometimes even take their lives. Ellie continues to explain her harsh reality to her young apprentice, warning Lunoa that others will inevitably suffer the fallout if she chooses to let criminals go out of pity. Mireille Katerina stands quietly in the background as Ellie delivers the final, cold lesson that one must always kill a brigand when given the chance, leaving Lunoa looking down in troubled silence. Walking back toward their transport along the dirt path, Ellie promises Lunoa that she will teach her how to fight very soon, emphasizing that she must become strong enough to protect herself. Lunoa looks up nervously and offers a hesitant word of agreement. As they resume their journey inside the carriage, Mireille suddenly calls out to her mistress, asking her to please take a quick look outside. The driver reports that a woman on the road is trying to hitch a ride and asks how they should proceed, prompting a focused Ellie to immediately command that they stop the carriage. Standing at the edge of the overgrown forest, a cheerful young nun waves her arm toward the travelers to catch their attention. Looking at the stranded traveler from within the vehicle, Ellie reasons that they simply cannot ignore a member of the clergy. Inside the moving carriage, the young nun lets out a cheerful sigh of relief and proclaims that the group are absolute lifesavers, admitting that she was starting to think she would have to walk all the way to the capital. Ellie responds with a polite smile, reassuring the stranded traveler that it is their absolute pleasure to help since they are already heading the exact same way. Lunoa listens closely as Ellie asks the traveler if she is a walking sister. The cheerful nun happily confirms that she is indeed something along those lines, leaving a curious Lunoa to softly repeat the unfamiliar term back to herself in wonder. Ellie turns to her young apprentice to explain the concept, clarifying that walking sisters and priests consistently travel the land on foot. She teaches Lunoa that these dedicated individuals specifically visit remote villages to cure sick people with their healing magic. These isolated villages always welcome them with open arms. Because proper doctors and professional apothecaries are rarely present in such distant areas, the people rely heavily on the arriving healers. The young nun smiles brightly and confirms the description, explaining that she has already traveled through a large number of nearby villages and decided it was finally time to move to a different area. Hearing about her selfless journey, Ellie openly declares that she truly admires the walking sisters' deep devotion. The young nun cheerfully waves her hand, declaring that traveling the land is simply what she does and insists there is absolutely no need to be so formal, inviting them to just call her Tita. Ellie smiles warmly and agrees to take her up on that casual offer. As the carriage continues along its path, Lunoa turns her focus back to her mistress and calls out her name. Looking with a deeply curious and slightly anxious expression, Lunoa directly asks Ellie how she managed to know beforehand that brigands would attack them on this road. The carriage moves steadily forward past the overgrown trees lining the route. Ellie begins her explanation by pointing out that the roads in this region are in an incredibly poor state. Lunoa prompts her to continue, asking what else happens as a result, leading Ellie to explain that maintaining the roads is absolutely crucial for any territory. Ellie notes that he understands this reality perfectly, praising him as a great ruler whose territory features flawless roads. On the other hand, as Ellie and Lunoa look out from the vehicle, Ellie coldly states that the lord governing this specific territory is a complete fool. Ellie breaks down the foundational rules of commerce, explaining that good roads naturally bring in trade, and trade inevitably creates a stable economy. She notes that improving a territory's economy directly increases its overall appeal, allowing a ruler to collect far more taxes when traveling adventurers and visiting merchants arrive, which ultimately creates a virtuous cycle. Listening carefully to the economic lesson, Lunoa pieces the information together and observes that this must be why devoting resources to protecting and maintaining the roads is so incredibly important. Ellie looks back at her young apprentice with an approving glance and firmly confirms that she is exactly right. Turning the discussion into a lesson, Ellie challenges Lunoa by asking if she can guess what happens to the economy when the roads fall into complete disarray. Lunoa places a thoughtful hand to her chin, nervously reasoning that goods would not flow very well, which would mean that remote and rural areas ultimately cannot get what they need. Ellie readily agrees with her assessment. Pushing her apprentice to dig deeper, Ellie prompts her to consider what else might happen as a result. Tita cheerfully cuts in with a bright smile, encouraging the young girl to try to think of the exact same situation the other way around, which leaves a startled Lunoa stammering in confusion as she tries to process the advice. Ellie maintains a knowing smile as Tita says that if farmers would heavily struggle to ship their various products directly to major cities, making the entire transport process far more pricey. The realization instantly strikes Luana, whose eyes widen in surprise as she lets out an enlightened gasp. Lunoa excitedly expands on her breakthrough, realizing that when transport costs rise, basic essentials like food, medicine, and other family needs ultimately become much more pricier for absolutely everyone. Tita matches her sudden excitement, loudly and happily confirming that she has hit the nail right on the head. Tita points a finger to her face and adds that when people must use most of their savings on daily needs, they naturally tighten their purse strings, causing the economy to take a major hit. Ellie looks out over the passing scenery and remarks that rural populations also suffer heavily from inflation. Lunoa sits quietly beside her mistress, absorbing the dark reality of the regional economy. The systematic decay is highlighted by an image of the desperate attackers, as the economic strain forces those who cannot make ends meet anymore to become brigands. This dangerous environment forces merchants to hire expensive escorts to avoid attacks, which also drives up prices and creates a vicious cycle. Our girl looks over at Tita and observes that she is quite knowledgeable about the economy for a sister. Tita laughs softly and waves her hand, noting that she cannot possibly compare herself to a professional merchant, prompting a thoughtful Lunoa to ask why the lord of this territory does not maintain the roads. Sighing deeply at the sheer incompetence of the local leadership, Ellie reiterates that he is simply a fool. She adds that he is probably skimping on basic maintenance costs just to save money, completely blind to the long-term devastation it causes his land. Reflecting deeply on the entire situation, Ellie observes with a serious profile that, as always, the masses must pay the ultimate price for their ruler's sheer stupidity. As the carriage continues forward, Mireille suddenly speaks up and calls out to Miss Ellie. Ellie looks surprised, muttering that it is a case of speaking of the devil, while Lunoa and Tita look on with sudden confusion. Looking out into the overgrown forest, Ellie lets out a sigh, remarking that she has half a mind to throw the criminals right on their lord's doorstep. In the woods, a couple of armed bandits stand closely together, holding their weapons firmly. Turning back inside the carriage, Ellie firmly commands Mireille to protect Lunoa and Tita. Hearing the sudden directive, Tita waves her hands and objects, assuring Ellie that there is absolutely no need for that and insisting that she will tag along instead. Ellie looks back in surprise, letting out a startled exclamation as Tita confidently declares that she can handle herself. Seeing the sister's absolute confidence, Ellie yields with a calm look and quietly agrees. Stepping down from the wooden carriage, Ellie addresses her new companion and directly asks if she can leave half of the approaching enemies to her. Tita walks forward beside her with absolute confidence, cheerfully declaring that it is a sure thing as a group of armed bandits emerges from the thick brush along the dirt road. Our girl reflects quietly to herself that dealing with the situation is a bit of a pain since she simply cannot go around killing people directly in front of a sister of the church. Moving with blinding speed, she unleashes a swift dash that catches a nearby bandit completely off guard, delivering a heavy strike. In a flash of physical prowess, Ellie slams her elbow straight into the attacker's chest, forcing him to spit out saliva as he completely collapses to the grass. Watching him drop, Ellie felt that a simple knockout should perfectly suffice for her current purposes. However, her calm thoughts instantly freeze when a sudden, aggressive shout to "Die, you trash," completely shatters the air from behind. Tita swings her heavy staff high into the air with a fierce battle cry, fiercely shouting that she is bestowing divine punishment upon the criminals. With incredible momentum, she brings her weapon straight down to deliver an aggressive bash right onto an attacker's head. Tita continues her onslaught with wild energy, shouting that her actions are strictly by the will of God as she aggressively commands the bandits to take her brutal strikes. Watching the nun smash and crack her way through the remaining enemies with terrifying force, Ellie stands completely frozen in the background, sweating slightly as she watches the unexpected display of violence in absolute disbelief. After delivering a final shout for the attackers to feel God's wrath, the last bandit lets out an agonizing scream and falls completely unconscious in the tall grass. Tita wipes the sweat from her brow with a happy sigh, cheerfully exclaiming that she is entirely done with her half of the fight. Ellie looks over and praises Tita for a job well done. However, upon inspecting the defeated men, the young nun gasps in surprise, noticing that Miss Ellie has left all of her opponents completely alive. She curiously asks if Ellie is secretly a pacifist at heart, prompting Ellie to offer a sweating, awkward smile while quietly murmuring that this is not exactly the case. Tita asks if Ellie chose to hold back her lethal skills strictly because she was being mindful of a church sister's presence. Stepping forward with her staff in hand, Tita aggressively nudges a fallen bandit with her foot while explaining that brigands are an absolute safety hazard who will inevitably attack other innocent people if they are simply let go. With a surprisingly cold and casual smile, she casually adds that she honestly does not mind at all if Ellie decides to kill them. Hearing a nearby attacker let out a low groan, Tita turns toward him with a bright, cheerful expression and happily tells Ellie not to worry because she will gladly finish them off herself. Ellie stands completely frozen in absolute shock, offering a stunned, breathless word of thanks while one of the nearby conscious bandits sweats in absolute terror at the nun's terrifying hidden nature. Turning her attention toward another criminal who is just starting to sit up, Tita bluntly remarks that he picked a terrible time to wake up. The defenseless bandit shrieks in total panic, frantically waving his hands and pleading for her to wait as the young nun steps down the dirt path to execute her brutal judgment. Terrified by her words, the conscious bandit panics completely, shouting out that he heard the Church of Ibris always gives sinners a second chance. He desperately begs Tita to please have mercy on them, prompting a calm but cold look from the young nun. Tita softly acknowledges his plea, agreeing that God is indeed benevolent just as he says. Placing a hand over her chest as a holy aura surrounds her, she gently reasons that while people are naturally prone to sin, God remains merciful and forgives those who choose to repent sincerely. The bandit's face instantly lights up with immense relief as he begins to thank her. However, Tita's expression shifts to absolute coldness as she softly drops the final condition, stating that brigands simply are not considered people in her book, which leaves the criminal sweating in complete horror. With a fierce glare, Tita aggressively hoists her heavy staff high into the air and delivers a chilling warning that God's mercy does not extend to their kind. Unleashing her terrifying strength, she swings her weapon forward and commands the brigands to suffer his absolute wrath. A brutal thud echoes through the woods as a bandit desperately shouts to stop, but the request is instantly cut short by a heavy whack. Watching Tita execute her harsh methods from a distance, Ellie breaks out into a nervous sweat and quietly reflects to herself that she might truly need to rethink her views on the clergy. Tita returns with a devious chuckle, gleefully murmuring to herself about what an incredible find she just uncovered among those savages. Ellie stands completely flabbergasted by the statement and curiously asks what she managed to find, prompting the smiling nun to step closer and eagerly present her treasure. Holding up a blood-covered hand, Tita reveals a harvested gold tooth to Ellie's utter astonishment. The cheerful sister beams with absolute joy, ecstatically declaring that she completely lucked out because the item will easily fetch a pretty penny on the market. Ellie sweats nervously at the gruesome sight, politely asking Tita if she would mind washing the blood off her hands first since something graphic like that might scare young Lonoa. Tita readily accepts the practical request, happily offering praise to God and stating that cleaning up is a sure thing. Meanwhile, the scene transitions to a grand cathedral spire signaling the kingdom of Haldoria. Inside the royal palace, a heavy door is suddenly slammed open with a loud slam as a frantic voice calls out for His Highness. Holding Sylvia close to his chest, Prince Fried turns toward the interruption with an annoyed glare, coldly complaining about how incredibly noisy they are before sharply demanding to know what they want. Inside the lavishly decorated chamber, a royal official stands before Prince Fried and Sylvia, urgently pleading with the prince to completely reconsider his current food distribution campaign. Fried dismisses the concern with a calculating look, questioning why he should stop when the poor are actively struggling to find food. He confidently adds that feeding the masses will do wonders for his own popularity, leaving the official nervously stammering that his plan is highly problematic. The official aggressively defends his warning, explaining that going through with such an uncalculated plan will instantly drain the entire national treasury. Fried sharply snaps back that the man is simply being ridiculous. Fried presents a direct comparison, reminding the prince that Lady Elizabeth used to distribute food every single week. The official explains that she never relied on treasury money unless it was strictly on His Majesty's orders because she funded those campaigns entirely out of her own pocket, prompting an annoyed click of the tongue from Prince Fried. The official stands firm, declaring that true charity isn't about distributing food without proper planning, and emphasizes that one must always consider long-term sustainability. Growing completely fed up with the continuous lecturing, Fried lets out a frustrated sigh, internally muttering about what an absolute drag the man is being. Fried completely loses his temper and furiously storms out of the room, shouting that he doesn't care anymore and telling them to let the poor starve to death. The panicked officials call after him, but the prince violently slams the heavy door shut behind him while aggressively telling them to shut up. Frustrated by Fried's stubbornness, one royal official grips his head and sighs that he wishes Lady Elizabeth were still there. His colleague completely agrees, holding a hand over his chest while wondering where the exiled noble lady could possibly be. Far away from the capital's drama, Tita slams a large mug down onto a tavern table with a loud thump. Blushing heavily from the alcohol, she lets out a loud, satisfied laugh and exclaims that the refreshing drink truly hit the spot. Tita loudly calls out to the tavern maid for another drink. Sitting across from her, Ellie watches the excessive consumption with a look of pure disbelief and asks if she should really be drinking that much. Seeing Ellie's concern, the young nun playfully notes that the church actually has a specific saying regarding this situation. Leaning in with a flush on her cheeks, Tita jokingly claims that God explicitly commanded them to drink. She bursts into loud laughter while repeatedly slamming her hands against the table, leaving a sweating Ellie to stare blankly at her while internally muttering about how incredibly drunk the sister has become. Continuing her tipsy speech, Tita loudly proclaims that alcohol is the water of life given to humanity by God. She adds with a grin that her wallet is positively bursting thanks to those brigands and argues that not enjoying a couple of drinks would be an absolute sin, prompting a surprised Ellie to ask if she actually managed to sell all of the loot already. Tita explains that she went ahead and sold the items the very minute they arrived, noting that all of it added up to quite a nice amount. She YGLY waves her arms and reassures Ellie not to worry about her own share of the profit, promising to hand it over later. Resting her chin on her hands with a calm smile, Ellie tells Tita that there is absolutely no need and instructs her to simply keep the money. As a completely stunned Tita stammers out her disbelief, Ellie gently adds that she should by all means think of the gold as a formal offering to the faith. Overwhelmed with sudden emotion, Tita calls out Ellie's name before aggressively leaping straight across the table with a dramatic jump. She tightly wraps her arms around a completely startled Ellie, crying out with tears streaming down her face that Ellie is an absolute saint. Sobbing loudly from the alcohol, Tita wails that God is incredibly thankful too. A panicked Ellie desperately struggles against the forceful hug and shoves her away, frantically telling her to go away out of fear that the weeping nun will get snot all over her clothes while Mireille and Lunoa watch the chaotic display in complete shock. Sitting at the tavern counter, Lunoa softly observes that Tita looks like she is having an immense amount of fun. Mireille listens with a gentle smile but looks back on her mistress's past with a trace of sadness. She reflects deeply that because Ellie lacked anyone she could truly trust in her life before, she had always felt forced to hide her genuine feelings entirely behind a tough facade. Mireille continues to watch her mistress with deep fondness from the counter. She reflects with great joy that these days, Ellie has finally started smiling from the very bottom of her heart. Meanwhile, inside a beautifully blooming garden pavilion at the palace, Prince Fried lets out an admiring gasp. Looking with absolute infatuation at his new fiancée, he smoothly declares to Sylvia that she is even more stunningly beautiful than a rose in full bloom. Sitting together at a table inside a garden pavilion surrounded by blooming roses, Prince Fried complains that those nagging idiots thoroughly wore him out. He smoothly adds that simply looking at her is more than enough to completely soothe his heart. Sylvia offers an elegant giggle and thanks her prince, though she softly trails off as a quiet thought crosses her mind. Leaning forward smoothly, Sylvia places a gentle hand on Prince Fried's shoulder. She softly challenges his words by directly asking him if he is absolutely quite sure that merely looking at her is truly enough. Fried calls out Sylvia's name as he passionately embraces her. Watching their display from the shadows of the palace hallway, a mysterious woman stands with her arms crossed, silently questioning how Elizabeth could have ever let a complete fool like the prince beat her in the capital. Standing alone near a stone pillar, the elegantly dressed woman reflects deeply on the former noble lady's sudden downfall and exile. She notes to herself that Elizabeth should be thoroughly ashamed of herself. As the carriage travels along the path, Mireille advises the person at the reins not to grip so hard to avoid spooking the horse. Guiding her young apprentice, Mireille encourages Lunoa to keep going, prompting a nervous but determined affirmation from the girl as Ellie watches calmly from her seat. Tita points ahead with excitement, eagerly calling out to Lunoa that they have finally almost arrived at their destination. Looking out at the shifting scenery with a composed expression, Ellie softly welcomes her companions to the true heart of the Udyr Empire. The large wooden carriage finally rolls past the outer boundaries and enters the towering stone structures of the imperial capital. Arriving safely after their long journey, the travelers prepare to disembark and take their first steps into the busy streets of the magnificent city. Standing in the middle of the capital streets, Tita waves a cheerful goodbye and declares that it is time to bid adieu, offering her sincere thanks for a fun journey. Ellie smiles warmly and responds that she also enjoyed traveling with her, while a smiling Lunoa waves her hand to tell the sister to take care. Walking away into the crowded city streets, Tita waves her arm one last time and loudly wishes that God's blessings remain with them. As Ellie turns her focus toward their next move in the capital, Mireille steps forward to inform her mistress that she has already successfully secured lodging for their stay. Stepping into the massive hotel suite earlier that evening, Ellie stretches her arms with a sigh of relief, celebrating that they finally have a proper chance to rest. Lunoa looks around the lavishly decorated quarters in complete awe while the towering facade of the hotel shines brightly under the capital street lamps. Settling into a plush armchair, Ellie asks Mireille if she would mind brewing some hot tea, prompting an immediate, polite affirmation from her loyal maid. Inside the grand building, Lunoa points around the room in absolute bewilderment, stammering to Miss Ellie that this hotel is incredibly luxurious. Ellie turns her head with a calm, untroubled gaze to confirm the observation, nonchalantly adding that Lunoa's own private room happens to be right next door. Hearing that she will be staying in such an expensive place, the young apprentice lets out a panicked exclamation of shock. Lunoa frantically shakes her hands and objects, insisting that she should stay at a cheap inn instead. Shaking her head, Ellie firmly cuts her off to remind her that they are in the capital to conduct serious business. She strictly explains that she cannot have her personal assistant sleeping somewhere cheap because people in high society would immediately look down on them, leaving a defeated Lunoa to nervously mumble back in compliance. Our girl delivers a final command for her apprentice to simply get used to the luxury, drawing a submissive agreement from Lunoa. The scene quickly transitions to the next morning outside the grand estate. Indoors, a composed Ellie sits comfortably by the bright window and holds a teacup, listening as Mirella softly calls out her name to grab her attention. Mireille steps forward to inform her mistress that a visitor named Arnaud has arrived to see her. Lunoa looks on curiously, repeating the name to herself in quiet thought while Ellie immediately commands her maid to let him inside. A sharp click echoes through the quiet study as the main office door is unlocked to admit the guest. Arnaud stands politely in the hotel room with his hand resting over his chest. He smiles and states that he was patiently waiting for her, adding that it has been a while since they last met. He begins to address her with a formal noble title before quickly correcting himself to call her Miss Ellie instead. Ellie steps forward to greet him warmly, noting that it has indeed been far too long since they last spoke. Arnaud bows slightly and responds that he is truly glad to see her in such good health, while Mireille and Lunoa watch their interaction from across the room. Curious about the newcomer, Lunoa turns toward Mireille and quietly asks who that man is. Mireille looks toward her and explains that his name is Arnaud Langley, clarifying that he used to work very closely with Miss Ellie back in the kingdom. Arnaud raises a hand and asks for forgiveness for jumping straight to business so quickly after her long journey. He smoothly explains that he has already pre-selected a highly suitable residence and an official commercial firm building for her, asking if she would like to go see them right away. Ellie smiles with a look of mild surprise, noting that they had not even informed him that they would arrive today, yet he is still as remarkably efficient as always. Arnaud chuckles and replies that he is only doing his job. Pleased with his thorough preparations, Ellie readily accepts and commands Arnaud to lead the way. Ellie evaluates the structural details of the property, examining the kitchen sink and the high-ceilinged room with large windows. Stepping forward, she notes that it is a very fine building and states that both the location and the size are absolutely perfect. Behind her, two property handlers stand holding their paperwork in readiness. Placing a thoughtful hand near her face, Ellie declares that she has officially made up her mind. Without a single moment of hesitation, she calmly announces that she will buy this mansion. The property handlers bow deeply from across the spacious room, offering their sincere thanks and promising to get all the formal paperwork ready for her immediately. Turning back toward her guide, Arnaud calls out her name to capture her attention. He explains that a few changes will be needed if she plans to use this specific building as the main headquarters for her commercial firm. Ellie raises a finger to her lips with an intrigued expression, calmly asking what specific modifications he has in mind while the handlers watch on in the background. In the background, the two handlers whisper among themselves in absolute astonishment, marveling at how a young girl could purchase such an expensive fortune right on the spot with complete certainty of what she wants. Unfazed by their chatter, Ellie turns back to Arnaud with an amicable look, adding that they should proceed with the plans if everything is all right. Arnaud wraps up their meeting by stating that he shall now go to complete the necessary paperwork for the building's remodeling. Ellie smiles confidently and instructs Arnaud to please do so. He promises Ellie that he will make sure her new residence is completely ready for her by tomorrow. Ellie expresses her sincere appreciation for his swift work. Ellie notes that this arrangement leaves them rather free for the afternoon. Mireille holds a serving tray and considers the schedule, suggesting that this gives them the perfect opportunity to handle other pressing matters. Mireille suggests that she would like to enlist some extra help during their free time. When a curious Ellie asks for the reasoning behind it, Mireille explains that they are in dire need of domestics to properly manage their affairs. She voices her concerns, explaining that with Trader expanding so rapidly, she fears she simply won't have the time to take care of Ellie all by herself. Ellie readily concedes that it is a very fair point, acknowledging that she absolutely needs Mireille's focus and assistance at the firm instead. Thinking over the logistics of finding help, Ellie suggests that they could simply post a job offer directly at the Merchants Guild. Mireille immediately expresses her hesitation, explaining that she would feel constant worry having a complete stranger by her mistress's side all day long. Placing a hand over her chest, Mireille offers a different path forward, directly asking if she might suggest purchasing a slave instead. Ellie absorbs the unexpected idea, reflecting quietly on the concept of slaves as people who can be bought and sold. The nature of the trade is broken down into two major categories: criminal slaves who are bound to atone for their past sins, and debtor slaves who are sold or choose to sell themselves explicitly to repay their outstanding debts. Regardless of how they entered the trade, a magical contract binds them strictly to prevent any chance of betraying their master. Recognizing the practical security of this method, Ellie calmly gives her agreement. With a confident smile, Ellie stands up and decisively announces that they shall visit a slave shop to find their new domestics. The scene shifts from the luxury hotel room down toward a grim, underground corridor lined with sturdy wooden beams and iron grates. Walking down the dark, cracked concrete hallways of the underground facility, Lunoa covers her mouth in complete shock as she catches sight of the poor individuals locked tightly inside the iron cages. Leading the group forward through the dim establishment, the merchant gestures toward the surroundings and casually asks what they think of the selection. The merchant points toward a battered child curled up inside and aggressively pitches the sale, explaining that while the kid has a couple of scratches, she is perfectly fit enough to work. Looking down at the young girl bound in heavy chains, the seller callously tells Ellie that if the child eventually breaks down, she can simply trade her back in for a brand new one, confidently boasting that she is quite the bargain. Ellie calmly replies that she will think about it, before turning away to exit the establishment with Mireille and Lunoa following closely behind her into the capital streets. Once outside the building, Ellie explicitly observes that they simply could not find anyone suitable inside that shop. Mireille readily agrees with her assessment and immediately suggests trying another slave shop instead, while a visibly shaken Lunoa lets out a sudden gasp of distress as she stands on the cobblestone walkway. Sensing the sudden tension, Ellie notices her young apprentice's pale face and directly asks Lunoa if she is all right. Stuttering nervously, Lunoa quickly tries to brush off her anxiety by insisting that she is completely fine, prompting a serious and grounding gaze from her mistress. Ellie softly notes that she won't cruelly tell her to just get used to seeing such things. Our girl firmly explains that this bleak situation is simply the harsh reality of things in the world, instructing her to always remember that truth. Looking down at the brick ground in troubled silence, Lunoa softly mumbles her understanding in response. Mireille looks up at a large building and directs Ellie's attention to it, stating that this is the place. Standing alongside her maid and Lunoa, Ellie observes that this shop certainly features a completely different atmosphere compared to the previous establishment. A polite young man holding a broom greets them at the gate, welcoming the group to the Cedric commercial firm and pleasantly asking how he may help them. Mireille steps forward as a spokesperson, directly informing him that they are looking to purchase a slave. The young attendant opens the gated entrance and politely requests that they follow him inside. Walking behind their guide, Ellie turns to her companions and notes that this is the educator's company, prompting a curious look from Lunoa as she repeats the unfamiliar title back to herself. Ellie takes the opportunity to teach her young apprentice, directly asking Lunoa if she has ever heard of the Empire's Merchants Guild Council. Looking up at her mistress, Lonoa admits that she has only ever heard of them in name only. Raising a finger to emphasize her point, Ellie explains that the council holds the entire financial world in their palms and details how their massive influence extends straight to the very heart of the government. She advises Lonoa that if anyone wants to successfully do business in the empire, they must always keep this powerful group in mind. 7 eminent merchants make up the powerful council. One of those high-ranking figures is known as the Educator, a highly influential slave trader who handles top-tier transactions and even directly supplies the imperial palace. The Educator himself happens to own this very shop. The young attendant gestures forward and politely asks the group to step this way. An elegant man steps forward to greet his guests, offering a terrible apology for the wait. Hand on his chest, he formally introduces himself as Cedric Lewins, the head of this company. Cedric opens his arms wide and smiles warmly, pleasantly stating that it is a true pleasure to make her acquaintance, addressing her directly as Miss Ellie Lays. Hearing her name, Ellie looks back in mild surprise and sharply asks how he already knows who she is. Cedric chuckles softly and asks how he could possibly not know about Trader and its prodigious chair, explaining that her firm has rapidly become an absolute powerhouse. He smoothly reasons that such incredible business feats are bound to create rumors throughout the empire. Ellie listens to Cedric's flattering remarks with a calm expression, openly questioning if that is truly the case. However, a subtle shift in her analytical gaze reveals her inner skepticism, as she reasons to herself that a prominent council member would highly doubt to care about a relatively small firm, operating all the way out in a border viscounty. Adopting a polite, diplomatic facade, Ellie breaks into a gentle smile and tells Cedric that she is incredibly honored to learn that such a renowned merchant has heard of her. Yet, her inner thoughts remain highly cautious, noting that this man most likely knows exactly who she is. Watching him closely, Ellie carefully reminds herself that she will absolutely need to keep a vigilant eye on the Empire's Merchants Guild Council moving forward. Cedric extends his hand in a welcoming gesture, directly asking Ellie what specific kind of slave she is currently looking for. Mireille steps forward to outline their specific requirements, explaining that they need someone to serve and assist Miss Ellie. She details that while any race is perfectly fine, the slave must be a girl. Mireille adds that because Miss Ellie travels quite often, the candidate must be physically strong enough to keep up with her. Cedric rests a gloved hand against his chin, calmly nodding that he understands the parameters perfectly. Cedric turns slightly to his young attendant and commands him to bring Misha directly to the parlor, drawing a swift word of compliance from the boy. Turning back to his clients, Cedric confidently states that he believes he has just the right slave they need, prompting a sharp, curious twitch from a pair of animal ears nearby. Cedric talks about a young beast girl with distinct animal ears. Cedric notes that he hopes that the visitor will find her to their liking. He smiles warmly, informing Ellie Lays that she should be ready for her and asking if she would mind following him down the hallway. Peeking curiously into a room along the path, Ellie listens as a faint voice inside practices simple arithmetic, pondering the sum of 30 plus 200. Observing the ongoing lesson from the doorway, Ellie wonders what they are doing inside the room. Cedric turns to her with a knowing smile and explains that this is an arithmetic class, prompting a surprised Ellie to ask if he actually teaches slaves arithmetic. He happily elaborates that their teacher is also a debtor-slave. He adds that after realizing the young boy had a natural gift for the subject, he tasked him to teach the others, noting with pride that the young instructor does a fine job. Leading the way further down the corridor as rhythmic counting echoes from outside, Cedric confidently remarks that his slaves naturally learn far more than just standard academics. In an open courtyard, several muscular men swing their swords in unison with a loud whoosh, forcefully calling out the count as they practice their physical training. Standing a short distance away alongside Ellie Lays and her maid, Cedric Lewins gestures toward the display and calmly remarks that, as she can see, they are remarkably well educated. Meanwhile, an instructor forcefully commands the trainees to call out the numbers louder. Cedric further explains that the slaves learn all sorts of practical skills, such as art, cooking, sewing, and scholarship, completely based on their own natural dispositions. Looking closely at the training hall, Ellie observes that his way of handling slaves differs drastically from what she has personally seen at other commercial firms. She points out that his slaves consistently seem to be in excellent health, prompting a confident smile and a word of absolute agreement from Cedric. Ellie notes that most common firms barely care for their slaves and intentionally lower their maintenance costs strictly to increase their profit margins, though she admits she remains unsure if that is truly the best business approach. Cedric maintains his pleasant look, firmly stating his core philosophy that slaves are not vulgar tools, but are instead actual people. He explains that only when a merchant ensures they are healthy, well-educated, and equipped with the tools to thrive can they ever live up to their true value, calmly noting that this is why his prices are naturally higher than those of his competitors, which draws a knowing acknowledgement from Ellie. He smiles calmly, pointing out that his high-quality slaves do come with a hefty price tag. Ellie admits that he has thoroughly sparked her interest, making her much more keen on purchasing one of his slaves. Cedric warmly declares that he is incredibly pleased to hear her say that. Flattered by her response, Cedric smoothly explains that customers who truly understand quality, such as Ellie herself, are the very reason his commercial company is able to prosper. Ellie giggles elegantly behind her hand, playfully remarking that he certainly knows exactly how to flatter people. Realizing how much time has passed, Cedric notes with a pleasant wave of his hand that conversing with her was so entertaining that he completely lost track of the time, before suggesting that they finally get back to their primary business. A sharp click echoes through the corridor as Cedric unlocks a door and politely invites the group to follow him inside. Standing stiffly in the room, the Catkin girl trembles from intense nerves, introducing herself with a heavy stutter as Misha Tail. Internally panicking over her awkward stutter, Misha stands completely frozen as Ellie looks on blankly. Cedric chuckles and asks his guests to excuse her, explaining that it is her very first time meeting with a customer, which makes her naturally nervous. As Misha remains visibly frozen and tense, Cedric reassures the group that while she is still young and inexperienced, he can guarantee she is well trained. He adds that because she is a Catkin, her physical abilities are excellent and she will handle traveling just fine. Cedric responds that he wouldn't exactly recommend her as a professional bodyguard, but she is more than capable of protecting herself. Ellie looks toward the slave trader and asks if the girl has any fighting experience. He explains that Misha's parents had taught her swordsmanship before she became a slave, adding that his own company has trained her even further since her arrival. Ellie steps closer to inspect her new domestic assistant, staring intently at her face while noting that her self-defense skills do truly set her apart. Turning back toward the merchant, Ellie addresses him directly to continue their discussion. Our girl firmly makes up her mind and confidently declares that she will take this girl, catching a visibly nervous Misha Tail completely off guard. Cedric bows his head politely with a warm smile, offering his sincere thanks for her patronage. The guy smoothly prepares for the transaction, stating that he shall bind her to Ellie with a magic contract at once. Cedric pricks his finger to initiate the magical process, reaching out toward the submissive Catkin girl. Activating the spell, a glowing magic circle manifests before his palm as he formally commands the system to transfer the ownership of Misha Tail from himself to Ellie, causing a soft light to envelop the girl's neck during the ownership shift. He speaks out to call Misha by her name while turning to declare to Miss Ellie that everything is officially all set and the Catkin girl is now completely hers. The guy warmly instructs her to serve her new master as well as she can. Overcome with deep emotion, a tear slips down the young Catkin girl's face as she softly sniffles in response. Ellie watches her quietly with a calm, attentive look as the young girl prepares to speak. Misha bows down deeply before Ellie, loudly declaring that she looks forward to serving her. Turning back to her former master with a bright, happy smile, she adds her heartfelt appreciation to Cedric for taking care of her until now. Cedric smiles gently and promises Misha that he will pray for her future happiness. With the transaction finalized, Ellie begins to address the young girl to establish her new role. Ellie gently states that she will be in Misha's care from now on. Hearing her new mistress's kind greeting, Misha nervously squeaks out a frantic acknowledgement. The scene shifts to the left panel where Ellie, sitting comfortably on the sofa, turns to her head maid and instructs Mireille to teach the young girl everything she needs to know, advising her to start slowly. Mireille immediately complies, assuring her mistress that she will do so. Arnaud stands before Ellie, bringing important news from the territory ruler. He informs her that they have received word from Lord Lucas, noting that the Lord is currently visiting the capital and wishes to see her. Hearing this unexpected notification, a collected Ellie smiles slightly and calmly inquires if that is indeed the case. Later that evening, Ellie instructs her team to let Lucas know that she will visit him tonight. True to her word, the meeting takes place in a beautifully decorated parlor. Lucas settles into a plush sofa and remarks that it has been quite a while since they last met. Ellie accepts a freshly prepared cup from her maid, breaking into a warm smile as she replies that she is truly glad to see that he is doing well. Then something caught her eyes. As they begin their conversation, she looks at his cup in pleasant surprise, noting that she certainly did not expect to be offered coffee and remarks on how rare it is. Lord Lucas gestures lightly, explaining that he actually had some coffee imported directly from the southern continent, and politely asks if the drink is to her liking. Sitting across from him, Ellie reassures her guest that there is absolutely no need for concern. Our girl smiles brightly while holding her cup, warmly admitting that she is also quite fond of coffee herself. Lucas mentions that he has heard rumors about how incredibly busy she has been ever since she arrived in the capital. Lucas directly probes further, explicitly asking Ellie what she is secretly scheming this time. Ellie playfully remarks how mean he is being before confidently claiming that she has done absolutely nothing yet. Hearing her choice of words, Lucas sweats slightly with a nervous smile, quietly reflecting on her ominous use of the word yet. He mentions that he had an official audience with the Emperor just yesterday. He clarifies that although he had already sent multiple letters detailing everything about her, the ruler still chose to summon him to hear the entire report in person, prompting Ellie to politely ask him to pardon her for causing so much trouble. Ellie leans back comfortably on the sofa, calmly expressing her curiosity about what will ultimately become of her. Lucas relaxes against his own seat and assures her that nothing will happen, adding with a relaxed look that they will simply just keep a watchful eye on her. Lucas explains that the Emperor himself deemed her past actions highly beneficial to the Empire and has chosen not to interfere. Hearing this massive development, Ellie responds that she was honestly starting to fret, admitting that the news is incredibly reassuring before prompting him to continue. Turning back toward his guest, Ellie asks Lord Lucas if he successfully presented the imperial family with her specific gift. Looking slightly strained with a drop of sweat on his face, Lucas confirms that he did. The scene shifts to highlight the elegant items in question, revealing the lavish beauty sets produced by Trader. He notes that those high-quality cosmetic products most certainly had a powerful effect on both the Empress and the Princess. Hearing his assessment, Ellie brings her hands together excitedly from the sofa and exclaims that she absolutely knew it would work. Ellie smiles brightly with her hands clasped together, explaining that her products were of the most excellent quality. She notes that she put an immense amount of effort into the packaging specifically to lift the lady's spirits. Listening to her praise her own merchandise, Lucas breaks into a nervous sweat, silently acknowledging that the beauty sets certainly looked like they would be popular with the ladies, though he remains slightly uneasy about her ultimate goals. Lucas looks directly at Ellie and asks how she honestly intends to take revenge on the kingdom with a peaceful strategy like that. Maintaining her absolute composure, Ellie glances back at the territory ruler and calmly advises him not to be so hasty. Reaching down toward the table, Ellie smoothly lifts a single rose from its vase. She notes that their current business success is merely another stepping stone along her path. Ellie declares her ultimate ambition to completely crush her homeland while simultaneously contributing to the Empire's prosperity. Watching her intense declaration, a deeply unsettled Lucas can only stare in absolute shock while Ellie quietly murmurs his name. Ellie firmly vows that she will make sure the kingdom's downfall is witnessed from the very front row. Standing in front of a large bookshelf, a nervous Misha Tail opens her small notebook to announce today's busy schedule. She states that Ellie will inspect the firm building and its ongoing renovations in the morning, followed by 2 meetings and 1 business negotiation in the afternoon. Our girl offers her thanks and gently requests that Misha inform her who she will be meeting with next time, prompting a quick, compliant response from the startled girl. Mireille steps forward to inform her mistress that she has received an official letter from Baroness Melanie inviting her to an upcoming party in the capital. Looking up thoughtfully, Ellie listens as Misha wonders aloud how they should draft their answer. Ellie reviews the situation and instructs her to let the sender know that she will attend. Mireille immediately complies, stating that she will handle it at once. Ellie's hand gestures toward, quietly reflecting on the mention of a party. Looking down at her puzzle, she quietly notes to herself that the invitation and the growing buzz have arrived with absolute, perfect timing. Elsewhere a view of the grand, lit hall shows the gathering socialites mingling through the evening. Standing gracefully inside the beautifully decorated ballroom with a glass in her hand, Ellie looks on as she is formally greeted by an approaching noble lady. Baroness Melanie smiles warmly behind her delicate lace fan, expressing what a true pleasure it is to welcome Ellie to the gathering today. She eagerly asks if Ellie is available, noting that she would absolutely love to introduce her to some of the other ladies in attendance. Calling out to capture the ballroom's attention, Melanie introduces Ellie as the prodigious chair of trader, proudly announcing that she is the genius behind the lovely cosmetics she has been completely obsessed with recently. The announcement immediately draws intrigued looks from the nearby noblewomen as the Baroness gushes about how she truly cannot get enough of Ellie's products. The surrounding crowd of ladies erupts into excited chatter, with one exclaiming that the cosmetics must be the secret to why the Baroness looks so exceptionally stunning these days. Mesmerized by the results, multiple noblewomen eagerly voice their desire to try the trader line for themselves as well. Our girl Lays gracefully addresses the gathered crowd, explaining that while Trader is indeed opening a brand new branch right in the imperial capital, they operate strictly as a small firm utilizing a selective membership system. The noblewomen look on with eager anticipation as Ellie smoothly offers an exclusive favor. She announces that since they are all close friends of the hostess, she will personally prioritize each of them whenever the firm begins accepting new members, prompting gasps of delighted surprise from the ladies. The ladies excitedly ask if she would truly extend such a generous offer, to which Ellie calmly and gladly confirms that she will. Internally, Ellie calculates that while her company's actual production capacity is perfectly high enough now to handle large demands, keeping an air of scarcity is far more profitable. The noblewomen chat happily amongst themselves, completely unaware of Ellie's true strategy. Ellie reasons to herself that their restricted membership system intentionally turns a trader membership into a highly desirable, exclusive status symbol. There is another reason. Suddenly, someone calls out to Baroness Melanie. Melanie stands proudly with her elegant lace fan, receiving overwhelming gratitude from her peers for introducing them to Ellie. Ellie thinks that by handing out these exclusive favors to her friends, the Baroness can effortlessly grow her own social influence, a powerful incentive that will naturally keep her advertising trader to everyone in the capital. She narrows her eyes, reflecting that building a firm union with such an influential figure will surely benefit her business goals in the long run. Maintaining her bright facade, Ellie smiles warmly at the gathered crowd, raising a finger as she generously offers to send all of them some complimentary samples of her products. The noblewomen react with absolute delight and astonishment at her generosity. Ellie enthusiastically notes that if they happen to like the samples, they should naturally come visit the firm building as soon as it officially opens, prompting the excited ladies to proclaim that they cannot wait for the store to debut. Offering a radiant smile as her targets express their overwhelming gratitude, Ellie considers this interaction to be the perfect final touch to her marketing strategy, confidently noting to herself that she did a truly great job. The scene then transitions past the grand, stone walls of the imperial capital at night, carrying the focus all the way back across the borders to the kingdom of Haldoria, where a frustrated voice within the palace sighs in deep irritation. Seated inside his study with his hand supporting his chin, King Bulat of Haldoria lets out a deeply worried sigh, anxiously wondering to himself how they could have possibly ended up in such a highly problematic situation. Duke Leyston explains that they simply had no choice in the matter because Elizabeth's treason and sudden escape forced them to approve of Lady Lockett as the prince's new fiancée. Bulat listens in grim silence, internally reflecting that he would have vastly preferred Rosalia instead of that annoying brat. Leyston reminds Bulat that Lady Rosila is already engaged. He notes that His Majesty had even personally arranged the engagement strictly to reward her extensive efforts during the selection process for the prince's fiancée. Leyston notes that attempting to overturn that arrangement will inevitably deal a severe blow to the crown. Listening from his armchair, Bulat heavily agrees with his assessment. Looking out over the palace window, Leyston advises that they are already imposing on Lady Rosalia's goodwill enough as it is, strictly commanding him to be careful not to antagonize her. Bulat acknowledges the warning just as the sharp sound of clinking steel echoes up from the courtyard below, where a sword is sent spinning high into the air. Down on the training grounds, a terrified young guard frantically throws up his hands to announce his surrender. Standing tall over him, Freed points a blade directly at his face, furiously shouting that he is completely out of practice and should be thoroughly ashamed to call himself a knight. Freed smiles after finishing his sparring session, warning the defeated guard to train like his life depends on it while the young man bows deeply to thank him for his guidance and exits the courtyard. Nearby, two other soldiers chat quietly about how the prince is completely out of control these days, heavily agreeing with each other's frustrations. As Lin walks away out of earshot, the soldiers continue to vent their complaints openly in the courtyard. One remarks that losing to Prince Fried on purpose every single time is a massive pain, while his companion notes that they have not much choice since actually winning against him would land them reassigned to the border. Standing near the palace wall, Fried overhears the guards continuing their harsh gossip about the prince. One mentions that with a legendary father like his, the prince should be plenty talented, but the other counters that the prince has never done a hard day's work in his life and points out that talent can only take a person so far. They laugh rowdily together, adding that if the prince worked half as hard as Lady Elizabeth, he would be way better already. Hearing them constantly mention her name, Fried clenches his teeth in absolute fury from inside the palace hallway, completely enraged. Fried stomps down the lavish corridor with heavy thuds, furiously shouting to himself that Elizabeth is a wanted criminal and a damn traitor. Gritting his teeth with an angry glare, he rages over how anyone could dare compare her to him. But he suddenly notices the conversation happening in the room. In a hallway of the palace, a royal official tries to reason with Lady Sylvia, pleading for her understanding. Sylvia fiercely responds that no means no, firmly refusing his request. Hearing the commotion, Fried approaches from down the corridor, demanding to know what is going on as the startled official reacts to his sudden arrival. Sylvia immediately runs to Fried's side and grips his clothes, crying out that the officials are trying to force her into something against her will. The panicked officials desperately try to explain themselves, begging His Highness to please hear them out. The royal official steps forward to clarify that Lady Sylvia needs to start taking her official princess lessons. Sylvia cuts him off with a furious shout, reiterating that she does not want to do it. As the official nervously attempts to insist that they are not asking her to complete everything all at once, Fried looks down gently and calls out her nickname to soothe her. Fried gently tilts Sylvia's face up, smoothly assuring her that she is perfect just the way she is and should never force herself to do things she dislikes. Sylvia looks up at him with utter infatuation, while the two officials stand completely frozen in the background, sweating nervously at his sheer indulgence. Fried decisively declares that she will take her lessons at a later time, leading Sylvia away as the officials frantically object. He violently slams the heavy door behind him, leaving a lingering, stern look on his face while a sudden voice asks him to excuse her intrusion. The dark-haired woman breaks into a polite smile, formally greeting His Highness and Lady Sylvia. Sylvia welcomes her warmly by the name of Chris, excitedly asking what magnificent treasures she has brought for them today, prompting Chris to pleasantly respond that she has quite a few choice items to show her. Sylvia excitedly asks to look at things together. Standing nearby, Chris watches them closely in absolute silence, while Prince Fried flatly remarks that it sounds exciting. Chris addresses Fried formally, noting that His Highness seems to be in a remarkably bad mood and asks if something has happened. Fried sighs with his eyes closed, sharply confirming that he absolutely is in an awful mood. He sits down heavily on the sofa with a loud thud, venting his frustration to Sylvia about how he finally managed to get rid of the evil wench who bullied her. He bitterly admits that because that woman was deeply involved in the government, the people in the castle simply will not stop whining about her absence. Fuming with visible irritation from the sofa, Fried angrily complains that the palace staff continuously disregard him even though he is their rightful prince. Looking at him calmly, Chris observes that they have the sheer audacity to belittle him. Chris gestures forward with an open hand, suggesting that under those circumstances, the prince should show the palace staff his true dignity as a royal. Fried asks what Chris means by her suggestion. Chris explains that the absolute best way for him to show his true might would be through direct battle. Chris elaborates that people naturally long for a strong hero who will protect them, assuring him that leading troops on a battlefield would stop anyone from ever looking down on him again. Fried places a thoughtful hand to his face, quietly reflecting on the concept of going into battle. Sylvia speaks up to note that their nation is not currently at war, prompting Chris to agree that this is indeed the main issue. She raises a finger to her face as she breaks down the political landscape, explaining that Haldoria currently maintains a non-aggression treaty with the Empire. She calmly notes that even if they set aside the various vassal nations, actively trying to wage a war against the Empire simply is not realistic. Chris advises that the easiest way forward would be to subjugate monsters to rapidly grow his public prestige. Fried quietly repeats the word monsters to himself as he considers the proposal. She turns her head toward the tall grandfather clock ticking quietly against the wall, noticing the late hour and remarking on how quickly the time has flown. Chris politely asks if they will buy the items, prompting an immediate and enthusiastic yes from Sylvia. Prince Fried is briefly taken aback by her swift response, asking for clarification before telling them to go ahead with the purchase. Chris then bids them farewell, promising to visit the palace again once she receives new products. As she steps out and the door clicks shut, Fried and Sylvia settle onto the sofa to look over their newly bought treasures. Holding a sparkling piece of jewelry in her hand, Sylvia beams with delight as she turns to Fried, excitedly pointing out how incredibly pretty the ring is. Fried, however, remains lost in deep thought. Suddenly, a sharp click echoes through the quiet room as the handle turns and the door swings open. A royal official steps inside to announce a visitor, prompting a highly irritated shout from Fried, who angrily snaps back that he is busy. A cold, demanding voice immediately cuts through the air, sharply questioning him on what exactly he is so busy doing. Lady Rosalia storms into the chamber with an elegant but furious gesture, mockingly noting that thanks to a certain someone, the entire administration has been losing sleep and working themselves straight to the bone. Glaring coldly at Prince Fried and Sylvia, she voices her deep disgust over how he still manages to find the time to call for traveling merchants, haughtily declaring that she would be far too ashamed to even think of doing something so completely careless. Fried clenches his fist and barks a sharp command for Rosalia not to dare disrespect him. Rosalia breaks out into an amused, wide smile right to his face, playfully remarking that he truly says the funniest things. Rosalia points out that respect must be earned. Looking directly at the furious royal, she drops a biting question, asking if he honestly thinks he deserves her respect. Fried is left completely beside himself, gritting his teeth in a surge of silent rage. Fried gestures wildly from across the room, furiously reminding her that he is her prince. Standing entirely unimpressed, Rosalia looks down on him and dismisses him as a total ninny, coldly reminding him that he was merely born lucky and mocking whether he has anything else of substance to boast about. Fried loses his temper entirely, sharply shouting that she is just a duke's daughter and questioning how she dares speak to him that way. Rosalia sighs with her eyes closed, noting what an absolute joke it is that this country cannot even function properly without using the strength of this measly duke's daughter, before narrowing her eyes to coldly enlighten him on the true balance of power. She confidently explains that House Fadgal is an illustrious house that has long been in charge of the entire army, calmly adding that their military forces completely outnumber his own little royal guard. Looking away with absolute authority, she firmly notes that unlike a certain unnamed ducal house, they have absolutely no intention of submitting to the royal family like obedient dogs. She coldly delivers a chilling threat, warning that they will pay dearly if they choose to make an enemy out of the Fadgal family. Standing a short distance away, Fried tries to brush off her words by awkwardly claiming that it is enough small talk. Rosalia drops a massive stack of paperwork onto the desk with a heavy thud, nonchalantly noting that unlike a certain someone, she is a very busy person. Fried points at her in absolute disbelief, demanding to know what she thinks she is doing. Rosalia calmly retorts that she is merely giving him work he can actually handle, mockingly telling him to just sign it and asking if it is really too hard for him. This prompts an angry exclamation from Fried, who demands she address him properly. Entirely unfazed by his outburst, Rosalia proudly states that she has been officially appointed as the special aide to the Crown Prince. She explains that His Majesty created this specific role particularly so that she could help his useless son figure things out. Then she looks at Sylvia, which causes her to flinch back in sudden panic. Rosalia sighs deeply, admitting that she must say she is thoroughly disappointed in Elizabeth for failing against such weak opposition. She closes her eyes and openly questions how Elizabeth could have possibly lost to someone like Sylvia. Glaring directly at a visibly trembling Sylvia, Rosalia bluntly states that she is just so entirely insignificant. She crosses her arms with a cold expression, adding that perhaps Elizabeth did not even manage to notice her existence in the first place, leaving Sylvia completely speechless. Lady Rosalia lets out a sigh of good grief while walking out of the room, leaving Fried and a visibly shaken Sylvia behind her. She mutters to herself that she feels like an absolute fool for ever squabbling with Elizabeth over a man as completely incompetent as him. With Rosalia finally gone, Fried snaps out of his stun and furiously commands a nearby royal official to hand over the paperwork. The startled official quickly complies and presents the document to him, while a deeply worried Sylvia watches the unfolding tension in complete silence. Fried schemes over the official document, noticing that it details financial aid meant specifically for their vassal nations. Infuriated by what he reads, he violently slams his hands onto the desk and lets out a frustrated shout, aggressively questioning why they are even required to continuously send those regions money all the time. Suddenly, a realization strikes Prince Fried. He turns to the official and orders him to revise the document immediately, but when the confused aide asks exactly how it should be changed, the prince chuckles darkly and tells him to never mind, declaring that he will happily do the modifications himself. Fried holds a finger to his face, smoothly noting to himself that it is only right for him to handle some of the administrative work directly. Meanwhile, far away from the palace's petty schemes, the scene transitions back to a brightly lit study where a smiling Lunoa works alongside her mistress, calling out to Miss Ellie. Mireille steps into the room to inform her mistress that she has a brand new update to share. Approaching the desk with a rustle of paper, she expresses her thanks directly to Lord Lucas's good words. Mireille points out a specific map location, detailing that a production base has been successfully secured right in the countryside of Lebrick Viscounty. The plan maps out how once they finish establishing their presence there, the company can seamlessly grow and manufacture all necessary ingredients inside their very own dedicated facilities, drawing an approving nod and a word of perfect agreement from Ellie. Turning back to her team in the study, Ellie directly asks Misha to tell her what she has planned for today. A nervous Misha loudly shouts out her compliance to get the itinerary ready. Misha references her notes to lay out the day's arrangements, informing her mistress that she has a formal meeting with the chair of the Bren commercial firm in the morning, followed smoothly by an official dinner with Viscount Naba later tonight. Satisfied with the schedule, Ellie offers a calm word of thanks. Curious about the upcoming arrangements, Misha explicitly asks what exactly the Bren commercial firm does. Ellie explains that they mainly sell lipstick, nonchalantly adding that it is not a particularly massive company and noting that they have heavily struggled ever since Trader successfully stole away their customer base. Ellie states that if Bren swears loyalty to her, she will happily turn them into a brand new subsidiary. Misha Tail looks forward with a concerned expression, asking what will happen if the company chooses not to comply. Our girl clarifies that if they refuse her offer, she will have no choice but to crush them until absolutely nothing remains. Misha shakes slightly from the declaration, while Ellie calmly changes the subject, noting that as for Viscount Naba, she fully expects that he wants Trader to open an official branch right inside his own territory. Misha asks if Ellie intends to fulfill that request, to which Ellie firmly replies that she will not for the time being. Sitting with her arms crossed, Ellie breaks down her immediate business strategy, explaining that they must focus entirely on strengthening their foothold in the capital first. Our girl smiles warmly as she elaborates on her long-term goals, pointing out that she fully intends to open new branches in the future, which makes maintaining a great relationship with these figures absolutely paramount. Standing nearby, Lunoa listens closely to the strategic lesson. Lunoa lets out a panicked exclamation of shock when Ellie suddenly announces that she will accompany her to the dinner as well. Ellie calmly explains that it is a very good chance for her to learn how to properly handle nobles, prompting a nervous but compliant affirmation from her young apprentice. Suddenly, a loud slam shatters the quiet atmosphere as Arnaud forcefully bursts into the room, frantically calling out to Miss Ellie. Breathing heavily from his sudden rush, he urgently declares that he brings grave news, prompting a focused inquiry from Ellie to find out exactly what has happened. Arnaud delivers an alarming update, stating that Haldoria's vassal, the Kingdom of Sarjas, has officially declared war on the Empire. He adds with extreme urgency that their invading army is actively marching toward the Lebrick Viscounty at this very moment, catching Ellie completely off guard. A stunned Ellie demands clarification, struggling to believe that the Kingdom of Sarjas would take such a bold action. Down below, a thoroughly confused Misha falters over the unfamiliar name, prompting Lunoa to step in and explain that Sarjas is a minor vassal state of Haldoria that possesses very few natural resources and relies almost entirely on tourism to survive. Misha stands nearby, wondering how such a small country would launch an attack against the empire. Ellie grows deeply unsettled, biting her thumb in intense contemplation as she reflects on how incredibly disastrous the timing is. The strategic landscape reveals that the kingdom of Sarjas sits directly to the southeast of the Udyr Empire. Because dense forests and rugged mountain ranges naturally separate the two nations, an invading force would have absolutely no choice but to march directly through Brachin Valley to stage their attack on the Lebric Viscounty. Ellie realizes that once the enemy troops clear the valley, they will emerge directly at their newly secured production base, causing Misha to gasp in sudden realization. Turning back to her attendant, Ellie recalls that there is a defensive outpost situated inside Brachin Valley, which Arnaud promptly confirms is known as Brachin Fortress. Our girl looks closely at her attendant and asks how many men they have deployed. Arnaud explains that while the exact number is classified intelligence, he estimates their forces to be around 500 to 600 men. She then asks about Sarjas' army. Arnaud further estimates the imperial garrison to be between 1,200 and 1,500 men at best, leading Ellie to calculate that if they focus strictly on a defensive strategy, they should easily hold the fortress for several days. Meanwhile, a sudden tapping sound draws their attention to the window, where Mireille retrieves a messenger bird and announces that an update has just arrived from their peers inside the Viscounty. She reviews the urgent letter regarding the ongoing war, reporting that Sarjas publicly claims they want to reclaim the land that the Empire supposedly stole from them. An imposing portrait highlights the stern, heavily bearded king ruling over the hostile vassal state. Ellie reacts with visible surprise, asking for clarification on the history of the conflict. Arnaud elaborates on the situation, explaining that the Empire annexed a portion of Sarjas' territory 20 years ago, before preparing to reveal the deeper truth behind that historical event. The historical reality shows that Sarjas completely abandoned the land when faced with a massive monster invasion. The Empire stepped in to protect the left-behind citizens before formally integrating the territory, prompting a shocked Lunoa to point out that the Empire actually saved them, making Sarjas' sudden demand to take the land back highly absurd. Ellie looks back and asks if there is any other news from the Viscounty. Mireille looks over the message and states that Lord Lucas immediately headed straight for the fortress the moment he first heard about the enemy invasion. She adds that Lord Lucas is currently leading a force of 1,800 men to reinforce the area. Furthermore, he has already sent a vanguard consisting of 100 foot soldiers and 50 cavalrymen ahead to secure the path. Ellie analyzes the numbers and reasons that it sounds like an easy victory. She notes that the fortress will successfully hold off the army of Sarjas and by enough time until Lucas arrives with his massive main forces to completely destroy the enemy. Despite the favorable tactical report, Ellie stands by the window with her arms crossed. Silently admits to herself that she simply cannot help but feel terribly uneasy about the situation. Later that same day at Brachin Fortress, a massive, thunderous roar suddenly echoes violently across the defensive stone walls. Dark smoke rises high into the afternoon sky. Inside the battlefield, chaos erupts as defending soldiers are viciously stabbed and cut down, their agonizing screams filling the air. One of the frantic garrison members shouts to his superior that they can no longer hold out, as a lone commander on horseback grips his sword tightly while looking out over the crumbling outer defense walls of the fortress. He angrily wonders to himself exactly who these mysterious and overwhelming attackers could possibly be. The next day, Arnaud forcefully bursts through the door with a loud bang, frantically shouting that he brings ill tidings. The room falls into a stunned silence as he announces that Brachin Fortress has completely fallen, prompting a grim Ellie to calmly request that he tell her more. Arnaud explains the situation to the gathered group, noting that a highly exceptional unit suddenly appeared on the battlefield to provide direct aid to Sarjas. Hearing this, Ellie points to her notes and asks for clarification on whether these fighters are entirely separate from the main state army. Arnaud relays that word has it these reinforcements are mercenaries, though they do not match the description of any famous corps. Ellie places a thoughtful hand to her face, reasoning that they must have either traveled from very far away or are a completely newly formed troop. Arnaud explains that the Sarjan forces took complete control of the fortress to establish a brand new bridgehead. He notes that Viscount Lebric's advance force has already been completely routed and he has yet to engage the enemy with his main forces. She reasons that Sarjas will likely establish a firm defense line to hold the captured area, or they might choose to head even deeper into the empire. Our girl reflects with a narrowed gaze that either way, the invading forces will end up severely spoiling her long-term business plans. Having thoroughly reviewed the tactical landscape, she firmly declares to her startled staff that she has made up her mind and they are officially joining the fray. A completely stunned Mireille cries out in absolute disbelief at the sudden declaration. Unmoved by the shock, Ellie begins reviewing paperwork at her desk and decisively states that they will hire adventurers and mercenaries, whom she will personally lead, while directly commanding Mireille to immediately prepare food and potion stocks for the campaign. Mireille frantically asks if her mistress is truly serious about this dangerous course of action. Ellie points out that the robust Brachin fortress fell in a single day and argues that even with more men, Lucas will not prevail against such an enemy. She remains entirely unfazed, continuing to smoothly sign her official documents. Our girl maps out the consequences of inaction, warning that the entire region will inevitably fall into major turmoil and Trader will certainly not be left unscathed. Turning her attention to her anxious apprentices standing across the room, she firmly calls out to Lunoa, drawing a swift, startled response from the young girl as Misha looks on nervously. Ellie firmly hands a message to Lunoa, commanding her to take the missive to the Adventurers Guild at once while making sure to present a letter of introduction as well. Turning to her Catkin assistant, Ellie instructs Misha to accompany her to ensure everything goes smoothly, prompting a confirmation from both girls. As the fast thud of retreating footsteps echoes down the hallway, Mireille steps forward with a deeply worried look on her face. Sitting calmly at her desk, Ellie closes her eyes and reiterates that her mind is firmly made up and she has chosen her path. Mireille voices her deepest concern, warning Ellie that if she chooses to fight openly, the kingdom will inevitably figure out exactly where she is hiding. Standing near her desk, Ellie calmly acknowledges the risk but counters that there is something incredibly fishy about how this war suddenly started, leaving Mireille momentarily bewildered. Ellie analyzes the hidden motives behind the conflict, pointing out that the king of Sarjas is known to be a highly reasonable man who would normally never engage in such reckless actions. Hearing this tactical evaluation, a bewildered Mireille trails off as she asks if her mistress means to imply something deeper. Mireille ponders if someone else is secretly pulling the strings from the shadows to instigate the conflict. Walking deliberately toward the study door alongside Arnaud, Ellie firmly states that she will simply have to go out there and see the truth for herself. Ellie leaves her study to uncover the truth of the conflict by directly stepping onto the battlefield. Meanwhile, word spreads like wildfire over at the Adventurers Guild inside the Imperial capital, where shock ripples through the halls upon hearing that Brachin fortress fell in just a single day. Guild Master Sergio reviews the sudden battlefield reports, pointing out that even though the fortress is located right on the border, they had a significant number of Imperial troops stationed there. Vice Master Iris stands nearby with a highly concerned expression, noting that strange things are definitely afoot regarding the swift defeat. An employee announces that they have just received a dire request, prompting Iris to tell the receptionist, Sarasa, that they will review it later since they are currently very busy. Down below, Sarasa firmly hands over the envelope anyway, clarifying that it is an urgent letter from a commercial firm called Trader, which immediately leads Iris to wonder if the message is actually from Viscount Lebrick. Sergio asks if the nobleman from Lebrick is currently the one actively fighting off the invaders in that region. Iris says that the Trader commercial firm used to have its main headquarters located right inside the Lebrick Viscounty, guessing that this message must be directly linked to the ongoing war. Sergio confirms that Iris's assumption is entirely spot on as he reads the official letter, noting that Trader's chair explicitly wants them to send a force of adventurers for her to lead directly into battle against Sarjas. Iris notes that the firm is generously offering to pay double the standard going rate, which sounds like an excellent deal, though Sergio admits he still does not quite understand her ultimate motives. He questions why a mere merchant would risk embarking on such an uncertain battle, wondering if she fails to realize that her forces will be fighting a proper army rather than common brigands. Iris adds that while it is only hearsay, there might be a practical explanation behind the merchant's bold move. Iris explains that rumor has a trader heavily invested in facilities near the war zone, noting that those properties must have cost quite a bit of money. Sergio nods thoughtfully at his desk, concluding that she simply wants to protect her investments. Iris counters that the client's ultimate reasons do not really matter, as she will smoothly get rid of the invaders for them, which is a great outcome. Sergio acknowledges that this is a fair point, before turning his focus toward the veteran adventurers available inside the capital. She notes that if they are looking for veteran adventurers in the capital to handle the job, a specific group comes to mind. Sergio looks over the envelope with a sharp smile, confirming that they will intentionally send her their finest members. A sharp knock suddenly echoes at a door in the capital as a voice calls out to announce a visitor out of the blue. A long-haired woman opens the door and surprisingly addresses the visitor as Miss Sarasa. Standing out on the stone pavement, Sarasa asks for forgiveness for visiting so suddenly, to which the woman warmly replies that it is no problem at all and inquires what she can do for her. Sarasa explains that she has an urgent offer for her party and would like to discuss it right away, asking if that is all right. The woman readily agrees, welcoming the discussion, before the woman turns back toward the open doorway to call out and capture someone's attention inside. She turns back toward the inside of the room and calls out to Elsa, announcing that it is officially time to get to work.